What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another amazing Naruto story. What if Naruto is Rias Bodyguard? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. Well shit, it looks like it worked. Spoke a grinning teen who looked to be at least 17. The teen stood at a solid 6 foot tall and was rippling with compact muscles built for speed. He wore a form-fitting short-sleeved black shirt that was tucked into a pair of black shinobi pants that were taped at the ankles. Over top he wore a sleeveless crimson-red trench coat that bore a rust-orange spiral which had the kanji for divine wind over it. On his feet he wore a pair of black ninja sandals. He had a pair of shining bright blue eyes that glowed even in the dark of this night. His face was devoid of any fat or blemish, leaving a refined and handsome face fitting royalty. This teen was Naruto Uzumaki, hero of the 4th Shinobi World War, bearer of the Uzumaki bloodline, and former Jinchuriki to the Kyuubi no Kitsune. That's right, former. After Naruto had defeated Pain and the man had brought back everyone he had killed, Naruto had realized how weak he really was. He had to rely on the Kyuubi's yokai to pull him out of that jam. He also had to rely on Sage Mode to defeat Pain in the first place. Of course those things made him a force to be reckoned with, but his predecessors had needed no such things. Jiraiya was an incredibly strong nin even without the use of Sage Mode. The Shodem, who was hailed as the Kami no Shinobi, had no such power-up. His father didn't either. They were all strong and powerful ninja on their own. They had all made a name for themselves and carved out a part in the history books as legends using their own 2 hands and their own chakra. After his little epiphany he had once more disappeared to Mount Myoboku and thrown himself into every possible area of shinobi life he could. Abusing the hell out of the Kage Bunshin Jutsu and his own insane stamina, within the span of a month he learned all the basics he had been denied at the academy due to his status as a Jinchuriki. In another month he had begun to learn what he was made for, ninjutsu. With his almost Biju level reserves he could toss out S-rank jutsu left and right like Tsunade could toss away money gambling. Not even Jiraiya or the Sandaime could claim such a thing. While his clones worked on that, he had thrown himself into actually learning a taijutsu style. His brawling style was great for unpredictability, but that was it. Using that as a base though he came up with his own style which he called Odakimono no Shikata, way of the Joker, I think. It was a style based on his natural unpredictability and ability to come up with ingenious plans on the fly. Its base form was just that, coupled with his natural speed. The next form utilized his massive reserves and the next stage utilized the previous 2 as well as his ability to abuse the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The next month was spent developing support strengths. After he found out from the Toads that his mother had been as deadly with a blade as any of the Kiri no Shinobigatana Shichinen Shu, 7 swordsmen of the mist, he had instantly took up the blade. It seemed that his mother's own prowess had been passed down as he had taken to it like a fish to water. Speaking of his mother, he had met what had remained of her inside the seal after an encounter with the Kyuubi. When she told him about what being an Uzumaki meant, he had cried and vowed that he would make his clan proud and revive the fear and awe that their name brought. Doing so he had inadvertently unlocked his Uzumaki heritage, turning his once blonde hair to the signature crimson locks of the Uzumaki. He kept his striking blue eyes, which his mother told him fit him more. Before she left she informed him that both she and his father had left several scrolls containing jutsus, letters, and other things in a sealing tattoo on his right shoulder. What he found inside said seal left him shocked. One scroll contained his mother's O-katana as well as scroll detailing the basics of her style named Benihime, Crimson Princess. His father had left him a scroll of how to perform the jutsu that had given him his moniker, the famed Hiraishin no Jutsu, Flying Thunder God technique. Both had left letters telling him how much they loved him and regretted what they had to do. His father being especially apologetic, knowing that it was his idea to seal the Kyuubi into his son. Both had also left him a massive scroll that contained several smaller scrolls that had written on them several jutsu of every element, even some Jikukan, time-space, techniques and Fuinjutsu, sealing techniques. Within the month he had mastered and modified his mother's Kenjutsu style, mastered the Hiraishin to the point of no longer needing the markers, become a seals master easily on par with the legendary Mito Uzumaki, and learned enough jutsu to put both Kakashi and the Sandaime's own ninjutsu knowledge to shame. Within 2 months he had risen from his base level of Chunin to the level of such legends as Hanzo the Salamander and Pain, Nagato, who were said to be able to fight on the level of the Ichibi, Nibi, and Sanbi. With the use of Sage Mode and or Kyubi he could easily be on the level of the Rokubi or Nanabi. It was at the end of the 3rd month that Tsunade had told him of the impending Cage Summit in Tetsu no Kuni, Land of Iron, that would determine how the hidden villages would handle the threat of Akatsuki. She had specifically told him because she wanted him to accompany her as a bodyguard, both because she knew the progress of his current training and having the man who had done the impossible and defeated Pain as her bodyguard would give her a slight edge in the debate. Naruto had at first denied her because he thought that he could continue to get stronger, but she had bribed him by offering him the position of Anbu for not just the mission but as an actual position when he returned to the village. Knowing that by accepting to join Anbu he would automatically gain a promotion to Junin as well, he had flashed into her office with a grin and accepted. They had bumped into the current Mizukage maid Terumi, who had inquired why Tsunade only had the one masked Anbu as her bodyguard. Naruto was playing the silent part and Tsunade had merely grinned and told the redhead that he was more than capable of protecting her. The small group had then encountered Gaara and his brother and sister. They too were curious about the masked individual, but Gaara had taken a look at the man and actually smiled, which shocked everyone present. The individual had merely nodded at Gaara, which shocked Mei and her group, as that was more than she had gotten the whole time they had been traveling together. Upon reaching Tetsu and being led to the meeting place, they were met by the other cages as well as Mifune, the leader of Tetsu and its samurai forces. He had explained that no weapons were to be allowed in the meeting room and any use of chakra, however small, was not permitted. He had then told Tsunade that her bodyguard would have to unmask himself and take off the robe he was wearing to show that he was not hiding anything. In a flourish, the masked individual did just that, revealing the form of a grinning Naruto, shocking all who knew of him. Mei of course realized why Tsunade had only brought him along. If the man could defeat the feared Pain who had toppled Hanzo, then he was more than capable of fighting any of those present if need be. What shocked her and Gaara was the red hair. Many had thought that the savior of Konoha and defeater of Pain had been a blonde. Naruto had said that he unlocked his Uzumaki bloodline, causing the Raikage and Tsuchikage to shift in stance. They had known that he was an Uzumaki but thought that his father's genes had suppressed his Uzumaki genes, but to hear that the bloodline that had brought fame and power to the village of Uzu and had needed the joint forces of 3 of the great villages to take down was back was not comforting. And that said bloodline belonged to the man who had brought down Pain, had trained under the famed Gama Sennin Jiraiya and Sharingan no Kakashi, and was the son of their most feared and hated enemy. The Kiroi's Senko just did not sit well with them. The meeting went off as expected, the cages bickering like children. Mei and Gaara had tried to have some input but were shot down by the Raikage and the old Tsuchikage. Tsunade had merely sat back and let them bicker amongst themselves with her hands steepled in front of her face and her eyes closed. After a rather loud comment from A and his almost wreaking the table, the room was overcome with silence. Taking advantage, Tsunade had asked, "Are you all done fighting like little children?" infuriating A and the Tsuchikage. Before they could retaliate, Tsunade launched into talking about her plan of having all the villages, large and minor, joining forces to take down the threat of Akatsuki. Before they could rebuttal, the forms of Tobi and Sasuke Uchiha appeared standing in the center of the meeting table. Tobi had then begun to tell them of his Eye of the Moon plan. Before he could finish though, a sandal met his face, rocketing him out of the room. Before Sasuke could move, he found himself on his back with the same sandal standing on his windpipe, stopping him from breathing. The cages looked up in awe to see Naruto bowing and apologizing for his rudeness, but he couldn't stand when the bad guy monologued. An infuriated Tobi stormed back into the room only to have a fist smash into his masked face. Tobi questioned how the blonde was hurting him when the power of his Sharingan should make him intangible. Naruto appeared behind him, his O-katana held at the Uchiha's throat. All who saw it were shocked. When Naruto had disappeared, a very familiar trail of light followed him. It wasn't his father's yellow flash. No, it was his own crimson flash. Konoha once more had the feared Hiraishin no Jutsu in its forces. Tobi and Sasuke had retreated, and after seeing Naruto manhandle the 2 most powerful members of Akatsuki, they had instantly agreed to Tsunade's plan. Both Kumo and Iwa had suffered massive losses due to Minato. They did not want to be on the receiving end of his feared jutsu powered by a biju. In the end, Naruto had let himself be captured, shocking everyone who knew him. However, when they saw his plan come to fruition, they couldn't help but smirk at the very Naruto-esque plan. Instead of the Akatsuki's sealing jutsu absorbing the Kyuubi, it had instead absorbed Naruto himself, leaving a very happy Kitsune the freedom to use his body and obliterate most of the Zetsu forces with a combined Bijudama and Hiraishin. The allied shinobi forces instantly fought back with much fiercer opposition. The revived legends were soon dealt with by the Kyuubi in quick fashion. Naruto was busy himself separating the incomplete Jubi and the statue. He had succeeded and freed the Biju from their prison. The appearance of the other 9 Biju signaled the end for Tobi. He had brought Madara back, but even Madara knew he could not fight against the combined might of the 9 Biju, the 5 cages, and the true heir of the Rikudo Sennin. Tobi, or Obito as he was later found out to be, were easily destroyed. Their existence, as well as a chunk of Hai no Kuni, was wiped off the map by Naruto and the Kyuubi's combined Biju. Rasen Shuriken no Jutsu. Soon after, the allied forces destroyed the Zetsu forces and Kabuto met a fate similar to Madara and Obito. An era of true peace came to the elemental nations. Tsunade stepped down and shocking everyone named Kakashi as the Rokudame Hokage. She of course stated that he was not her first choice, but Naruto had turned down the position. Naruto had explained that he was happy to have fulfilled the wish of his parents and godfather, but peace just was not for him. Even after becoming a full-fledged sage and becoming in tune with nature itself, absorbing the Kyuubi's powers and freeing said Biju had given him a lust for battle. He had also grown used to living his whole life on the edge of a knife, so he could not enjoy the peace he had brought. With the combined efforts of the Biju, Senjutsu, and his own mastery of Fuinjutsu, Naruto left his world behind. This all led to his standing on a rooftop at night and gazing out into the city that lay before him. It saddened him a little that this world had destroyed much of nature, but still he found a park not too far away and using his connection to nature learned what he could of the world. In the span of 10 minutes he had learned that he was currently in Japan. Luckily they spoke a language similar to his own, and learned of the existence of devils, angels, and the true God. He wasn't too shocked by this. He had housed a massive construct of chakra that was a force of nature itself for 17 years of his life. Which brought him to the question of what he was now. He had been exposed to nature much more than even Hashirama Senju and had absorbed the powers of the most powerful demon. There was just no way he could be human now. But was he a demon? No, because he didn't use yokai like a demon. His chakra wasn't senjutsu either. Naruto pondered on that. He had transcended the boundaries of humans, demons, and sages. I think I like that term. Yay, I'm a transcendent. Wonder if this world has ramen. And off Naruto went into this new world to do what Naruto did best, be surprising. What kind of ripples would Naruto make in this new world? Join us in him to find out. Naruto had spent his first few days in this new world getting accustomed to the various new things like buildings, cars, businesses, and all the things that came with this modern world. Learning about them from nature and interacting with them in person were two totally different things. Nonetheless, he had taken it all in stride and through the use of henge and kage bunshin had managed to build himself quite the stash of money. Using said currency he had purchased himself a good-sized home and planted dozens of new plants in and around the property. He may have gotten used to this new world and all, but he was still born a Konoha shinobi and a sage, and as such he needed to be surrounded by nature to feel at home. Through his first few weeks in the new world he had encountered his fair share of devils and angels that wandered the city. Being a sage and an Uzumaki had gifted him with a rather decent sensory ability. Nowhere on the level that Sasuke's teammate Karen, who he suspected was an Uzumaki, was, but still it allowed him to sense people in his vicinity, and using said ability he could feel the different beings around him. The devil's aura gave off a sense of darkness, which was easy to see why. Angels had more of a light feel to them. Then there were some odd ones. He could sense some angels, but instead of the usual light feel they had a tainted feel to their energy that separated them from the normal angels. Then there were some humans who bore some of this tainted angel energy as well, which confused him even more. Being Naruto he had to sat his curiosity and did some investigating. Being a ninja his version of investigating meant kidnapping someone and interrogating them, Though that may have less to do with being a ninja and more to do with him spending so much time with Anko after the cage summit. Being Naruto, though, he waited to kidnap the right person. He waited patiently and soon enough witnessed a devil trying to attack and presumably eat a human. The red-haired Uzumaki had easily handled the weak devil with nothing but his hands, allowing the young human to run in terror. The arrogant thing refused to cooperate, and so Naruto resorted to using a jutsu Ibiki had developed for just such people. It was a watered-down version of the Yamanaka clan's mind jutsu, but it still worked effectively at getting what you wanted out of someone's mind. The chances of them surviving the just you, though, were not so good. Using said jutsu, he learned about the interesting angels who had fallen, and even the great war that was waged between the three factions. After finding out the basics of the war, he could easily place blame on any of the factions, and to him it seemed that all were equally at fault. Living the life of a ninja was a jaded one. Living the life of a Jinchuriki was even more so. The old Naruto probably would have rushed out to help the good guys, but he was the Naruto that had bonded with his dark side, had suffered crushing loneliness, and the Naruto that had grown up and accepted his Uzumaki heritage. He had fulfilled his role as the chosen one and paid for it with his blood and innocence. As far as he was concerned, the affairs of this world were none of his business. If they tried to mess with him, he would show them why he was hailed as the new Kami no Shinobi and the Nidaime Rikudo Sennin. All he cared about was getting into a few good fights and really enjoying himself without having fangirls hound him every step. As he left the alley that he had cornered the demon in, he felt 3 sets of eyes watching him. One a devil, another an angel, and the last one of the fallen angels. The last 2 radiated power even if they tried to suppress it. He would classify them as around Gaara's level. The devil, though, was young but still relatively strong, probably around Anko or Yugo's level. Wanting to have fun, he looked up at where he knew they were and waved with a big stupid grin on his face. "Hi there." Naruto chuckled on the inside as he felt all 3 of them narrow their eyes in surprise. "You know it's not polite to stalk people. Pretty sure that's illegal actually," and before they could react, Naruto was gone in a crimson flash. "I didn't sense anything from him, at all," echoed the thoughts of the 3 hidden figures. One was a well-endowed and beautiful crimson-haired teenage girl who wore what looked to be a school uniform of some sort. The other, not far from her, was a well-dressed man with blonde bangs and the rest of his short messy hair black. The last was a handsome-looking blonde-haired man garbed in a white robe. A few weeks later, we find Naruto enjoying the peace of the neighborhood park. He had begun coming to the park regularly at night as, other than his own home, it was the only place that held enough nature for him to meditate. However, today his normal meditation was interrupted by the appearance of 3 very unique signatures. One was from the night that he had encountered that stray devil, and the other 2 were a fallen angel and a human with a rather odd power residing in him. None of them were anywhere near strong enough to be considered a workout, so he would just let things play out. Naruto realized, though, that he wouldn't be able to return to meditating as the fallen angel released their power into the air. It wasn't anywhere close to those he was used to, but still it was enough to irritate him. With a sigh, he ran his hand through his long crimson locks and walked to see what all the commotion was about. Naruto watched in interest as the fallen angel attempted to skewer the human with her tainted light powers. What piqued his interest, though, was that the devil was doing what he was doing and just watching it all happen. He raised an eyebrow as the fallen finally succeeded in making a human shish kebab and the devil leapt into the clearing. He was surprised at the human dying, but more at that devil. She was, to say the least, a bombshell. The girl was his age and already had curves bordering on a freaking Tsunade level. Though he guessed it had to do with her being a devil and all. What really caught his eye, though, was her vibrant red hair. He guessed it had something to do with his father or his Uzumaki heritage, but he had always found girls with such red hair more attractive. Naruto raised an eyebrow again as the red-headed devil revived the human with some weird chess pieces. Guess that's how they are bringing their numbers back up, reincarnating humans. Wonder if the other 2 factions have similar systems. He then saw the fallen angel launch an attack at the red-haired beauty. Naruto shrugged, knowing she could more than handle herself, but some part of him still enjoyed playing the hero, and with a crimson flash Naruto was gone. One second Rias was prepared to defend herself and show the fallen angel why you don't mess with the Grimmery family, and the next the red-haired guy from a few weeks ago was in front of her stopping the light spear with his index finger. Now I'm not really against violence, but I am against violence when it involves such a beautiful girl, and with a simple move of his hand the light spear was stabbed into the ground where it disintegrated. He can't be a devil if he can touch a light spear and not feel any pain from it, so that must mean he's either an angel or another fallen. But why would he save me? I'm positive he knows what I am, so why? Questioned the still kneeling Rias. Her attention was then drawn to the battle at hand when the fallen angel huffed and summoned another light spear and charged at her fellow redhead. Showing no signs of even trying, Naruto moved his body slightly to the left and lifted up his right foot where the fallen angel's face was. The fallen angel was stopped a mere second later. He had literally put no power into that, so the fallen had just took all the force of her dash to the face courtesy of Naruto's sandal. With another sigh and his hands still in his pockets, he spun and kicked the fallen with enough force to send her flying through several trees, though that was nothing more than a love tap to him. Tsunade probably could have done the same with not but a flick of her finger. He then turned to the kneeling redhead behind him. I know you could have handled her yourself, but I kinda got a little bored just watching. Sorry for interrupting. I'll be off now, and Naruto turned and began to walk away. Wait, what are you? The still curious Rias asked. If he was human, then she could have him join her peerage, and if he was this strong as a human, then he could possibly become near ultimate class and help her handle that issue. Naruto turned his head and smiled his signature foxy grin. Good question. Let me know if you find out, as I would like to know too. Rias could only gape in shock. Well, can you at least tell me your name? Geez, I know you're a devil, but still, isn't it common courtesy to introduce yourself first? Smirked Naruto. He just had so much fun messing with people. Rias had to resist the urge to blast the guy at that weird half-insult. Sorry. My name is Rias Grimmery. Naruto kept his smirk up. See, that wasn't so hard now, was it? Nice to meet you, Rias. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. But I do have to be going now. Bye-bye. And in another flash, Naruto was gone as fast as he had appeared. So who was that bucko? Asked a curious buxom blue-ish black-haired teen who appeared from a magic circle just behind Rias. Someone who could be very useful to have in my peerage, Akano, answered a still-thinking Rias. This Naruto person was powerful, much more powerful than he let on. It scared her to think that he may well be on the level of ultimate class already. For that brief second where he flashed away, she had been able to catch a glimpse of his power, and what she saw was unbelievable. Akano then pointed at the human Rias had resurrected as one of her pawns. What of Issei-san bucko? Oh him? Take him back to his home. He'll be fine, and we'll have Kiba bring him to us tomorrow during school. Rias replied, waving her hand nonchalantly. She was interested in the sacred gear Issei had, but Naruto had caught her attention more than the pervert. This is odd to say the least. A confused but still calm Naruto spoke. Whenever he used the Hiraishin, he would sense these two great powers on his level for the briefest of moments while he was in the in-between. He had used the jutsu many times in his world, and all he could see was his surroundings bleed into each other, making them look like some jumbled mess, though that was the nature of the jutsu. The jutsu was a Jikukan, time-space, jutsu, and worked by using the user's chakra to in a sense fold the universe in half, allowing almost instant teleportation. The markers his father used were a focal point for his chakra, but Naruto had been able to use the special chakra that was the Uzumaki bloodline to eliminate the need for a marker. He still needed a focal point, yes, but with as dense as Uzumaki chakra was, he could do much the same as his mother and turn it into chains. Using the chakra chains, he would make a sort of handrail to the place he wanted to be and simply follow the chakra chain to its end. However, his curiosity had been piqued, and so using his knowledge of the jutsu, he had used it and then ended it prematurely, landing him in what he liked to call the in-between. In his world, it was the same space that Kakashi's Kamui lead to, and the same place Obito would place his body when using his Sharingan ability to become intangible. It made sense that all Jikukan techniques would lead to the same place. This world's in-between was what had made him blink in curiosity. It reminded him of what Jiraiya had described to him that one time on their training trip, that one of his spies, hookers, had slipped him something called LSD. There were various oddly colored orbs floating about, and there was a sense of endlessness to it. All in all, other than the odd colors, it was an endless void just like his worlds in between. He sensed that other than him there were two other beings that were here, and both came rather close to his own power level, and knowing this, Naruto grinned in excitement. To catch either of the two beings' attention, he flared his chakra, making the ground on which he stood crack. With his grin still on his face, he felt the two massive sources of energy begin moving towards him. It didn't take long for him to see one of the sources of energy, as it was a massive red dragon. He quirked his eyebrow as he saw that the other energy source was what appeared to a preteen dressed in a gothic loli costume of some sort. The massive dragon roared in questioning, "What are you doing here, human?" Naruto only whistled as his hair was swept back at the force of wind generated by the roar. "Well, you see, I've been looking for someone strong enough to spar with, and I happened to feel your power, so I thought, why the hell not, and here we are," spoke the cheeky redhead. "You think you can stand against me, human? I am Great Red, the true dragon," and with that, Big Red moved to squish Naruto with his massive paw. However, much to both his and Office's surprise, his paw was stopped from cratering the ground where the human stood. "You know, I fought a nine-tailed fox about your size, and she was just as arrogant, but damn, at least she had the common courtesy to treat me like an actual fight and not some bug to squish," came the voice of Naruto from under Great Red's paw. He pumped chakra through his arms and in a show strength tossed the massive limb away, causing Great Red to almost tip over. Great Red narrowed his eyes as he could finally sense just how much power this human was letting out, and knew that unlike most beings who had come to challenge him, that he would actually cause him to fight. Office could as well, but she hardly if ever actually tried to beat him. They had an interesting love-hate, well, more like begrudging respect-hate for each other relationship. "You are no mere human, are you? I cannot smell devil or angel from you either. What are you? No human can possibly be this strong." Naruto smirked as he got into the beginning stance for his Odakimono no Shikata, way of the Joker, where he relaxed his muscles and stood still. The style was meant to be surprising, and with his speed and flexibility he could change his form to whatever best fit the situation without telegraphing his moves through a stance. "Been asking that for a while now myself. Best I could come up with is that I'm a transcendent." "Transcendent? Very well, I've never fought a transcendent before, so show me what you are capable of," roared a battle-ready Great Red. Office was shocked as she could see that Red was going to actually take this being seriously. What interested her even more was that she didn't doubt that this transcendent could very well take on Red. If he could win was an entirely different matter. Only the combined power of the four Satans or the four Seraphs was enough for herself or Great Red to do more than just swat them aside, and even then it required only a portion of their true power. This being, however, was a mystery. He looked and seemed human for the most part, but he radiated power that easily matched her own and Great Red's. "Let's see just how strong you really are, Mr. Transcendent. Luckily we're in an endless void and don't have to worry about getting others involved or property damage, which means I can really let loose," Naruto thought as he let his hold on his chakra go. He normally had to hold down a lot of his power just so that he wouldn't poison or kill people with the amount of nature chakra and pure chakra that leaked out of him. "Guess I'll start us off then. Futon. Odama Rasenshuriken. Wind style. Big ball spiraling shuriken." And with nary a thought, Naruto's now signature move formed in his right hand, dwarfing Naruto himself. With a toss, the massive spirally mass of chakra headed straight for Great Red, destroying the ground underneath it as it sped towards its target. With a roar, Great Red unleashed a massive beam of energy at the incoming swirling ball of doom that was Naruto's futon. Odama Rasenshuriken, however, much to his and Office's surprise, instead of the two attacks exploding on impact, Naruto's attack began to cut right through Red's beam. Due to the spiraling nature of the attack, it was able to cut right through the beam with little to no effort, causing Great Red to lean to the side to dodge the attack. Shocking him again, though, was despite his obvious dodge, some of his scales were still damaged. Before he could question it, Naruto was already unleashing his next attack. Kaden. Karyu Enden. Fire style. Fire Dragon Flame Bullet. And with a breath, Naruto unleashed a massive stream of flames almost the size of one Great Red's limbs. Due to his own size and the size of the attack, Great Red could do naught but take the attack head-on. With a grimace, Red's torso was bathed in the massive stream of burning flames. Naruto stopped fueling the attack with chakra and soon the scorching flames ceased and revealed that several sections of Red's torso had been burned black due to the high intensity of the flames' heat. Great Red wasn't known as the true dragon for nothing though, and despite his wounds he unleashed a stream of his own flames. They bathed the spot where Naruto was, but the Uzumaki had taken advantage of their difference in size and sped up Red's massive limbs and leapt into the air above Great Red long before the flames could reach him. Futon. Kami Oroshi no Jutsu, godly wind from the mountain. Naruto called and Great Red was buffeted by winds with such force that they would have surely slammed a lesser being into the ground and kept them pinned there, breaking bones at the same time. Even still, Red was struggling to move due to the pressure the winds created. As Naruto's impromptu flight came to an end, he summoned a normal Rasengan in both hands and slammed them both into the top of Great Red's scaled skull, sending him sprawling onto the floor, kicking up a storm of dust. When the dust cleared, a grinning Naruto and panting Great Red were revealed. With a massive roar and flap of its wings, the rest of the remaining dust was cleared out. "I can see that my size will do nothing but hinder me in this battle," grunted out the battered Red. Naruto raised an eyebrow when his vision began to distort and the oddly colored orbs that flittered around became much brighter. Being a sage and the container for a kitsune though meant that he knew exactly what was happening. Naruto merely snapped his fingers and the world around him faded back to normal. He was shocked though when the form of Great Red was revealed again, but this time in a much smaller size. Where Naruto was barely the size of one of Great Red's claws, he was now only a few inches shy of Great Red's size, putting the true dragon at around 6 foot and some inches. "Didn't know you could use illusions, but you're gonna have to do a lot better than that to fool me with an illusion," Naruto spoke as he once more took the beginning stance for his taijutsu style. "I figured as much as I can smell kitsune on you, and they are the only creatures whose illusions best my own. Though that illusion was only meant to distract you so I could shrink myself to a more suitable size," revealed the now much smaller Great Red. With a nod to the two were off in burst of speed only seen when fist met paw. Naruto was shocked to find that Red was actually very skilled in terms of hand-to-hand combat. He had figured that a dragon of his size would just use said size to his advantage and not even worry about knowing any actual style. What threw him for a loop was how Red incorporated the use of his tail and wings into it. He used his wings as distractions or shields and his tail as an extra limb to hit with. Naruto though had made his style to be able to fit any situation, and sparring with a 9-tailed kitsune helped to prepare him for just such styles. The two separated, Red spewing another stream of flames and Naruto calling out, "Suiten! Daibakufu no Jutsu, Great Waterfall." When the two attacks met, a huge amount of steam clouded the area, reducing the visibility of most greatly. But Naruto was a shinobi sage and Red was a dragon, so neither needed their vision to do battle. Great Red used the reduced visibility to his advantage and cast an illusion over the red head. Naruto knew almost instantly that he was in an illusion and dispelled it, but the short time it took him to dispel the illusion was all Great Red needed to slam his scaled paw into the side of Naruto's face. Naruto was sent flying out of the misty area and skidding across the floor, red hot on his tail. As Naruto bounced off the ground, Red used his tail and wrapped it around Naruto's ankle and sent him into air at breakneck speeds, a beam of energy following him. The beam collided with Naruto's form and exploded on impact. A few seconds later, the smoking form of the Uzumaki was seen plummeting to the ground, where it crashed, cratering it due to the velocity it had gained from its fall. Even still, Red was on edge as he doubted that combo alone would put down the feisty red head. He was proven correct as the next instant he felt a fist smash into his scaled abdomen, causing him to bend over in pain and loss of breath. Naruto didn't end it there though and grabbed the dragon's skull and slammed it into his knee, though he paid for that as Red's scales tore into his skin and tore off a good chunk of it. Despite this, Naruto spun and heel kicked the true dragon in the snout and sent it tumbling like Red had done to him. Still not finished though, Naruto went through a few hand seals and called out, "Doden! Doryuheki, Earth-style wall," summoning a massive wall of earth in front of Red's form. In seconds, the dragon's tumbling form painfully slammed into the massive wall of earth. Naruto then flashed to Red's fallen form, Rasengan in hand, only to receive the true dragon's tail into his body, where it pierced straight through him, causing him to stumble and giving Red the opening he needed. Red used his tail to slam Naruto into his own earth wall where it pinned him, then pierced Naruto's chest with his claws. He then headbutted Naruto with so much force that he was sent through the wall and violently ripped out of the grasp of Red's tail and claws. Red flew into the air and attempted to burn Naruto alive only to catch a glimpse of a crimson streak of light before he felt Naruto slam both his feet into his back, sending him back to the unforgiving ground. Naruto's falling form only seconds behind him, and Odama Rasengan in hand. Another cloud of dust covered their forms only for Naruto's body to be thrown out of it, a trail of his own blood following him. The dust cleared to reveal the battered form of Great Red panting heavily and Naruto's blood covering his claws and tail. Across from him Naruto struggled to his feet panting as well, his clothing torn and burned, yet his body didn't seem to have a scratch on it. "How are you still not wounded? I've stabbed you twice now with my claws and once clean through with my tail," shouted an irritated Great Red. Even Ophis would have been severely wounded at this point, yet this Transcendent remained unscathed. Naruto only chuckled. "My family was known for its abnormal longevity and healing. Mine was amplified due to another to even greater heights and only got stronger as I got older." Quote, "Of course you have a healing factor. Just great. As much as I am loath to admit it, I'm on my last legs here." "One last go?" questioned the grinning Great Red. He wouldn't openly admit it, but he enjoyed battling just as much as any dragon. It was in their very being to want to fight and show who was dominant, to show who stood at the top of the food chain. His battles with Ophis were more like spats, and neither really wanted to fight, even if neither would admit to it. But this Transcendent had pushed him to fight like he had when he had been but an arrogant hatchling out to prove his worth, and it had been many a century since those days. On the sidelines a gaping Ophis attempted to regain her composure. She had been witness to many a great battle in her long lifetime where blood was spilled by the gallons and even magic flew like the very wind, but these two, their battle was nothing like that. Neither really used flashy magics or spilled too much blood. It looked more like one male dragon fighting another to show who was the alpha, and such fights only involved pure force of will, the very strength in their body, and the cunning they had in their minds. Even still she knew who had won this fight. Should this Transcendent lose this last little skirmish, Ophis knew that thanks to his abnormal healing factor, which was insanely rare even amongst beings such as them, that he would simply rise once more and be ready to dish out even more. Great Red on the other hand truly was on his last legs. From the way they fought, Ophis knew that this Naruto person had gotten to his current level through blood, sweat, and tears, and had fought tooth and nail to constantly keep getting stronger. Herself and Great Red had grown complacent knowing that they were at the top, until recently at least. "Fair enough, as I do want to ask some questions," Naruto grinned. With a nod to each other the two godlike beings began to charge up their final technique. In Naruto's right hand, gale force winds began to form a vortex, gouging out trenches where the winds touched the ground. In his left hand, flames that seemed to melt the very ground around them formed a similar vortex. Naruto recalled when he and Sasuke had performed this technique to destroy Kabuto and his own little Zetsu army. Naruto knew that performing the attack on his own weakened it severely because Sasuke was a much better fire user than he was, being able to recreate the blaze release, but that didn't mean that his version wasn't insanely strong. When performed in tandem with Sasuke, the jutsu had been the only jutsu to ever be marked as a triple S rank kinjutsu. His own version, while weaker, was still a double S rank. The only just use stronger than this was the version he performed with Kurama. Across the way, Great Red mentally grinned as he knew he was going to lose this last little skirmish, as he could feel the amount of energy those two attacks alone had, and they were more than what he could perform right now. At his peak he might be able to make flames as strong as those, might being the keyword. Even still his pride would not allow him to simply give up, so he gathered what he could and began charging one of his beam attacks. Naruto slammed the two swirling vortexes together and let it fly, calling out, "Shikuden! Korin Shippu Shikoku no Ya Zeroshiki, Scorch Release. Halo Gale Jet Black Arrow Style 0. The very air around the swirling shuriken-shaped technique was almost boiling from the intense heat being emitted while the winds continued to gouge a trench into the ground several feet deep. With a mighty roar, Red unleashed his own attack, the bright red beam flattening the ground underneath its user and itself due to the pressure the energy emitted. Like the time before, due to the swirling and cutting nature of the attack, Naruto's empowered Rasengan was able to carve a path straight through the beam of energy. Red closed his eyes in preparation for the technique to hit, only to barely feel the heat and cutting power graze his side. He looked behind him to see that the destructive technique had curved around him and miles away exploded, making a crater several hundred feet deep and several hundred feet across. Red only chuckled before falling to the ground in exhaustion. "You never quite explained me to why you're following me," Naruto asked as he calmly walked to his home, an equally calm Office walking beside him. "It's simple. You have the capacity to manhandle Great Red, and I want him out of the dimensional gap so that I may have my peace and quiet once more," Office calmly spoke, not even turning to look at Naruto. Naruto just shook his head as he could tell she was lying if slightly, but wouldn't push the matter. Due to his being the chosen one, he had received a gift of sorts that allowed him to know what kind of person someone was almost instantly and then bring out their good traits. It was the whole reason that Kakashi had taken to calling him Konoha's most surprising shinobi. It was this gift that had allowed him to bond and ultimately save Princess Koyuki, Sasama, Shien, and countless others. Speaking of adventures, he wondered if he should do something similar to Jiraiya and start writing his own story, though much less perverted than Icha Icha. Kami knows that his whole life was just as good, if not better, than any action, drama, or adventure book. He also wasn't a fan of his rather underhanded way of getting money right now. Using shadow clones, henge, and some minor genjutsu was easy, and being a shinobi wasn't against his morals, but it was rather tedious and bothersome. As he mulled his new idea over in his head, he could sense that a certain red-headed devil was trailing him and his new house guest. He had no problem with it, as she wasn't really causing him any problems, and he'd be lying if he said that he didn't find her very attractive. He had met many beautiful women through his journey and had become quite close with a lot of them. Hell, he had housed an orange-haired vixen who had hounded him near constantly to be her mate and had attempted to seduce him on several occasions. Being honest with himself, he had grown quite fond of Kurama during his 3-month training stint on Mount Myoboku. She had been the only person he could talk to who wasn't a toad. She had also been the one constant in his life, and as a shinobi, constant people or habits were what kept you sane in an otherwise insane world. As he continued his train of thoughts, he realized that he had strayed from thinking of the bombshell she-devil on his tail and had instead transferred over to the women who he had grown close to in his home world. Part of him was sad that he had left them behind, but another part of him knew that even had he stayed, that it wouldn't have worked out. If he had become romantically involved with any human, he would long outlive them and possibly his own children. Uzumaki longevity powered by Biju Yokai and Senjutsu meant that he was going to live quite a long life. His ancestor Mito had lived well into her hundreds, and that was because of her Uzumaki blood alone. Kurama would have been the only candidate for perfect spouse, mate, but due to her being a demoness and not but a construct of chakra, kids were out of the picture. With a sigh, Naruto unlocked the door to his home by biting his finger and smearing blood on the handle, which only received a quirked eyebrow from Office. Naruto merely waved off the unasked question with, "I'll explain later." He then allowed Office in before he spoke out loud, "You're more than welcome to come in, Rias." He then walked in and left the door open only for said crimson-haired devil to walk through the door and close it behind her. Both women raised an eyebrow at the other before they followed Naruto to his kitchen, where there was a chest-high island with rather tall chairs surrounding it. The two females took a seat across from the other and Naruto walked to his fridge. "Anybody want anything? Water? Soda? Booze?" Office spoke first, not tearing her gaze from Rias. "Water." Rias did much the same. "Tea would be lovely." Naruto nodded and grabbed the two their desired drinks, heating Rias tea with a minor Kaiden jutsu. He grabbed himself a beer, which Rias raised an eyebrow at. "Old enough to kill, steal, and defy the law of physics, old enough to drink and fuck was my people's motto, more or less," Naruto said, answering her unasked question. Naruto then seated himself, "So I can assume that the both of you have some questions, most having to deal with who I am, what I am, and where I came from, right?" Both girls nodded at that. Naruto took a swig of the beer, then ran his hand through his rather long crimson hair. "We'll better get comfortable cause it's a rather long story. Okay, so let me get this straight. You're a ninja sage from another dimension who near single-handedly brought ultimate peace to your world, ending generations of hate, grief, and darkness. You are also pretty much a deity level being due to circumstances from your birth and events throughout your life which culminated in you being your world's child of prophecy. Bout sum it up, spoke a surprisingly calm Rias Gremory. It was far from being single-handed, but yay, that's the gist of it, spoke the Uzumaki. He had just finished telling his two house guests his life story, of course skipping the smaller details and such due to how long the story already was without said details. As it was, it had taken him almost 2 hours to tell it to them, having to stop every now and again to explain to them things like what chakra was and how it worked. Join my peerage, spoke a now confident Rias. There was no way she could pass up the opportunity to have such an amazing power in her peerage, even if turning him took all the remaining pieces she had left. PFT, good luck girlie, the ever-stoic Ophis said, bringing attention to herself. Turning an irritated gaze at her fellow female, Rias finally asked the question that had been bugging her for quite some time, and who are you? I hardly feel anything from you, which means you're either a really weak devil or a regular human. Naruto turned a curious glance to the lowly-themed being as he too wanted to know the answer to that. Ophis had only told him her name, and that was about as much info as he could glean from her. He didn't really care too much about what she was, as such things never bothered him in the first place. One of his best friends was a massive construct of chakra that had been sealed into his stomach at birth, and his worst enemy had been a human who was not more than a sore loser who had gotten stuck in the friend zone. Species and race really meant very little to him. While Uzumaki-kun wouldn't know of me, I at least expected an heir to one of the 72 pillars to know of me. Though I have grown quite adept at hiding my presence these last few centuries, Ophis said, the ever-neutral expression and monotone voice not once changing, though she did get a raised brow from the redhead Uzumaki at the added suffix to his name. Rias could only look at her wearily. If this person was strong enough to warrant her infamy amongst the 72 pillar families, then she was clearly powerful. How powerful that was, though, remained to be seen. To be short, my name is Ophis, the infinite dragon god, Ophis said, leaving a dumbfounded Rias gaping. Naruto just hammed at the information, as he himself wasn't much for titles despite his own numerous ones. Back in the elemental nations, many had taken to calling him the Nidaime Rikudo Sennin, second sage of 6 paths, Biju no Tente, master of the tailed beasts, and various other monikers likening him to his ancestor. Rias, on the other hand, was left bewildered at the information. Ophis and Great Red were said to be two of the strongest beings in existence, only being matched by the power of the true god. Not even the Seraphs or 4 great Satans could stand up to their power, let alone the corrosive properties of their home plane, the dimensional gap. Yet what shocked her even more was Naruto's own calm demeanor, as well as the fact that Ophis had taken such an interest in her fellow redhead. To have caught the attention of such a powerful being spoke volumes about his own power, but how he compared to Ophis remained to be seen. Wait, then how do you two know each other? A still shocked Rias asked. After our own meeting in the park, I left to investigate 2 powerful auras I felt whenever I used my father's signature technique, which bends space and time to make travel instantaneous. I found myself in the dimensional gap, as it's called, and found Ophis and Great Red there. Wait, you survived the dimensional gap? That place is said to be so potent that the very air is as corrosive as acid and kills anyone almost instantly. Rias spoke, interrupting Naruto. So that's what I felt when I entered there. But my body is special in that it can adapt to almost any condition to ensure my survival, so it must have taken the qualities of the dimensional gap and broken them down to make me immune to its effects. Anyways, as I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, Naruto said pointedly, staring at Rias, who only giggled nervously in response. I met Great Red and Ophis, and Great Red seemed like he would be a good challenge, so I fought him. Sadly, he didn't have my stamina or healing factor, so he couldn't keep up and the match was over faster than I would have liked, Naruto said as calmly as if he was talking about the weather. Again Rias could only gape. Sure, she had felt a hint of his power and seen a hint of what he could do, but to be able to not only fight the true dragon on equal ground but come out the winner was unbelievable. Such a thing had never been heard of before. And that's when she figured out why Ophis had scoffed at her attempt at getting Naruto into her peerage. She was nowhere close to being powerful enough to attempt such a thing. She knew that even her brother Sirzex wouldn't be able to do so, even if Ajuka gave him a whole set of mutated pieces. With a sigh, Rias plopped herself in her seat once more as she calmed her nerves. Sitting next to her were arguably the 2 most powerful beings on this plane of existence. For a minute no one spoke a word, Rias regaining her composure, Naruto simply enjoying his alcoholic beverage, and Office, well, no one really knew what she was doing or thinking. Naruto then stood from his seat and stretched whilst yawning. Well, I've had a pretty interesting day so far and it is getting pretty late. I know Office is planning on staying with me, but how about you, Rias-chan? Hearing Naruto snapped Rias out of her thoughts concerning said redhead. Yay, it is pretty late, if it wouldn't be much of a bother I wouldn't mind staying. Well, the bedrooms are upstairs and they all have beds and such. So feel free to pick one. Bathrooms are upstairs if you want a shower as well. See you both in the morning then, and with a small wave Naruto was off to the stairwell leading to the beds. The two women stood seated, Rias looking at Office questioningly. Never thought that the Ouroboros dragon would be a gothic Lolita. Being a big tit cow isn't everything Gremory, was Office's monotone rebuttal. Before Rias could say anything else, Office had left the room, presumably to find a room for herself. The red-headed Gremory could only fume at the insult. Bucko, you don't look too happy. Anything wrong? The blonde Bishonen knight Yuto Kiba asked. Rias only sighed in response. She was currently in Kuo Academy's occult research club building, which was used as a guise for herself and her peerage members. She had spent part of the morning with Naruto and Office, who she had come to dislike for her irritating monotone voice as well as the various insults she would throw at Rias. Rias knew she was no match for the dragon god and could only fume and try and insult Office back, which due to her natural lack of emotions was very difficult. She had left Naruto's home in a huff because of this, and still her peerage members could tell that she was still greatly irritated. Nothing, Kiba. Just go get Issei-san so we can tell him of his new responsibilities, please? Rias said as she regained her composure. Of course, Bucko. A few minutes later we find one Issei Hyodo freaking out at the idea of having died and been reborn as a devil. Before he could make even more of a fool of himself, everyone heard a masculine voice come from the window. Geez kid, calm down. Is it really that big of a deal that you're a devil now? Both Kiba and Kaneko prepared themselves to combat the red-haired teen only to hear their king say, Naruto-kun? What are you doing here? Many members of the room were shocked at the familiarity with which Rias spoke to her fellow redhead. Many knew that she was not one for getting too close to too many people, so to hear her use such a familiar suffix deeply confused everyone as to who this teen could be to earn such a privilege. The kid over there intrigues me, and I have a feeling things are going to get really interesting for you guys, so I might as well stick around and see if I can find any good fighters, Naruto said from his seated position on the windowsill. Kid? What do you mean kid? You don't look that much older than I am, yelled Issei. Fair point, but I've seen and done more than you ever will in 2 lifetimes. Have you felt the blood of your enemies coat your hands? The rush of adrenaline as you fight to stay alive just a bit longer? The pain of losing one of the few people who ever gave a shit about you? The shock of someone you consider a brother stabbing his hand through your chest, because you got in the way? The occupants of the room could only stare wide-eyed at the redhead in shock. The look in his eyes and the slight change in his posture told them that everything he had said was the absolute truth. Even Rias was shocked at what he had said. He had given them the abridged version of his story, and so a lot of things were left out, and to find that even if he stood before them, a godlike being now, he had gone through hell to achieve said power. True power like that was never easy to attain. It always came with a price, and if the look in Naruto's eyes said anything, it said that he had paid that price in full and then some. Issei could only nervously shake his head in the negative. Well, until the day you do, you will be just a kid to me, Naruto spoke. Rias coughed and began to explain in full detail to a now cowed Issei about his new life and how Devil Society worked. Naruto only quirked an eyebrow here and there when he found that Devil Society sounded much like life back in the elemental nations, especially within the daimyo's capitals. Naruto grew a little more interested when Rias told Issei that he was special because he held what was called a sacred gear within him that would boost his abilities significantly. To him it sounded too good to be true. The idea that such a powerful tool would have virtually no drawbacks seemed a little too off to him. He understood that they were powerful tools and that Issei specifically wielded the power of a dragon, who even in his world were revered for their immense power, but still it was too good to be true. He would have to do some looking into the matter a little more himself. He may not be actively participating with any side, but being a ninja meant that he liked to keep himself informed on both his allies' and enemies' strengths and weaknesses. For now the only thing you can do to raise your status in the devil world is to pass out these flyers and help the people who call on her services. Kiba can help show you the ropes so to speak, Rias said, dismissing her knight in new pawn. Kid's got potential but he's got a long ways to go before he can attain it, Naruto said while gazing out at Kuo Academy in slight interest. May I get you some tea, Naruto-san? Spoke the busty brunette. That would be lovely, thank you, Naruto said, taking in her appearance. He may not be a super pervert like his godfather, but that didn't mean he didn't appreciate the female form, and the brunette in front of him was a prime example of the female form, being almost as attractive as Rias was. Rias still had the upper hand in his opinion, mostly due to her crimson locks. Rias soon took a position standing in the window where Naruto himself was seated, joining him in his gaze. She of course was also undressing him with her eyes, and boy did she like what she saw. He may not be able to join her peerage, but he still may yet be able to solve her little problem. It also helped that Naruto seemed to be a rather laid-back guy, with bouts of odd happiness as witnessed this morning when he had ramen for breakfast. It could also be said that he cared deeply for those he called his precious people, and would happily storm the gates of hell to help one. All in all, Rias would not mind at all marrying the man, knowing full well she and any children they had were safe with him around and would be loved. Before she could enact her seduce the sage plan, a Kano appeared near the two, announcing that the tea was done. Rias only gave the girl an irritated gaze at interrupting her, to which a Kano could only sweat drop at, wondering what she had done to irritate her cane. The two redheads took a seat on opposite sides of the table that held a chessboard. Naruto took a sip of the tea and smiled as he quite enjoyed the tea. Turning to Akano, he offered her that same smile, causing the busty girl to blush quite heavily. "This is some really good tea, Naruto said, sweat dropping as he realized he had never gotten the girl's name. Sorry for not introducing myself. I am Akano Himejima, and I am Bukao's queen," Akano said, bowing to Naruto at the end. Naruto just smiled at her again and said, "And my name is Naruto Uzumaki, good to meet you, Akano-chan, and thank you for the great tea." He may not have been too well-mannered growing up, but both Jiraiya and Tsunade had beaten it into him, in Tsunade's case literally, that he had to at least know how to conduct himself. The whole time the two were talking, Rias could only fume as her queen took away the attention of her fellow redhead, further interrupting her plan. Before Akano could continue to do so, Rias interrupted, "Sorry that I didn't introduce you to my peerage. You've met Kiba my knight, Ice my new pawn, and now you've met Akano my queen. The white-haired girl you saw briefly was my rook, Kaneko." "You called Rias senpai?" the now-present Kaneko said. "Hello, my name is Naruto Uzumaki," Naruto said with his smile, and try as she might, Kaneko could not fight down the blush that the handsome man brought on. "What is it with this place and emotionless lolis? Is that their export or something?" Naruto thought with a sweat drop. "So how do you know Bucko, Naruto-san?" a curious Akano asked. She had known Rias for years and she had never once seen someone like Naruto around her, and she was sure she would remember such an attractive male. Naruto sighed as he recounted to them the basic gist of who he was and what he had done, including his bout with Great Red and his new roommate Office. Akano and even the usually stoic Kaneko grew wide-eyed and their jaws hit the floor. In front of them sat arguably the most powerful being in all existence, and he was calmly sipping tea. "So Issei and Kiba are the only human ones among your peerage?" Naruto spoke as he sipped his tea, causing even Rias to look up at him in shock. Though Kiba does feel a little different than most humans, like he was experimented on. Akano feels the same way, though it seems to come from her birth rather than an outside source, and Kaneko feels like a Nekomata to me. The girls knew he was powerful, but he didn't tell them what abilities he specifically held, so for him to be able to tell such things within the span of only an hour or so was amazing. Akano, Kiba, and Kaneko's species and such were kept under wraps, and not many knew about them outside of the peerage. Seeing their shocked looks, Naruto decided to elaborate. "Being able to sense who and what was around you was an invaluable skill in my old profession, and thanks to my own heritage I am slightly better at it than most. Not as great as some of my other family members, but still decent enough to pick up on such things. You were close with Nekomata, but Kaneko is actually a much rarer and stronger breed called Nekosho." "But how did you even guess that?" Rias said in seriousness. "I'm a friend of one of, if not the, most powerful Nekomata, Nibi no Bakaneko, monster cat of the two tails. And Kaneko had a similar feel, though does her being a Nekosho have to do with her being able to use senjutsu? Naruto said, still enjoying the tea. He had found that the Biju had actually dimension traveled when they were younger so they could better learn to control the powers his ancestor had gifted them with. This meant that the Biju were known throughout most planes of existence in some form or another. Kaneko was shocked as among the Nekomata race legends of the powerful two-tailed cat were talked of in fear and awe. Not only that, but Naruto had been able to detect her natural inclination to senjutsu, which most high-class devils couldn't detect. The fact that he was even aware of senjutsu astonished her. "How do you know of senjutsu?" Kaneko asked, speaking for herself. Naruto smirked as he put his tea down on the table and his head down, causing his bangs to shadow his eyes. Yet even still they could see Naruto's foxy smirk on his face. That's when they felt it, a pool of power building, and it felt calming and warm. The source of the energy was none other than Naruto, and Kaneko knew instantly that it was what her race was known for, senjutsu. Simple, my dear little kitty, and with that Naruto lifted his head to show them his now slitted crimson eyes and whisker marks. As he opened his mouth to talk, they could clearly see that his teeth had now sharpened into fangs. "I'm a perfect sage." Miles away atop a rather tall building, a black-haired busty woman with cat ears and a cat tail to match awoke and narrowed her amber eyes as she felt a pulse of energy that was similar to her own. Senjutsu? But who else could use so much of it? Nya. A stunned Kaneko could only mutter out a quiet, how? My godfather made a name for himself and was renowned for being the Gamma Sennin, Toad Sage. He took me to meet the same toads who had taught him to harness senjutsu, and they saw fit to teach me the same skill. With a lot of time I was able to actually master the skill to such a degree that I can now use the power nature gives me as seamlessly as if it were my own. A still grinning Naruto bragged. Wait, if that's the case, then why did you not take on the characteristics of a toad if that's where you originally got the skill? A curious Rias asked. She knew some of the basics of senjutsu, as having Kaneko around meant she would at least need to know certain things about it. Kaneko herself was curious about that as well. As far as she knew, when you used senjutsu you became more like the animal you were closely attuned to, and from what Naruto had said that would have been the toads for him, yet he looked nothing like a toad and if anything looked almost canine-like. That used to actually be the case. However, due to certain circumstances I encountered in the recent months, my affinity has switched from toads to a much more vulpine animal. Foxes? But they're hardly known for their prowess in senjutsu. Rias pondered. Close but no dice, Rias-chan. Not foxes but kitsunes, Naruto grinned, flashing his fangs once more. At that declaration the girls were once more shocked. Kitsune were among the more powerful demon, devil races and were said to be in the same league as dragons, vampires, and phoenixes. Their immense power lay in their natural affinity to fire, cunning, and illusions. They were said to have no match in their power over illusions, and there had even been tales of such powerful kitsunes that they could bring their illusions to life, killing their opponents without ever lifting a finger. Kaneko muttered, her white hair covering her eyes from being seen. Rias and Akeno looked at the girl in curiosity and concern, wondering why she had gone so quiet. While she was rather monotone, she was hardly ever quiet, and was if anything very outspoken with her thoughts on people and situations. To see her so quiet was something they hardly ever saw. Run that by me one more time, kitten, Naruto said as he released his hold on nature chakra, turning him back into the sapphire-eyed teen he usually was. Can you teach me? Kaneko asked again, only slightly louder as to barely be heard. Naruto shrugged as he picked up his teacup once more. I don't see why not. I must admit that it is a rather useful thing to know, and it would be such a sad thing to waste. What Kaneko did next shocked everyone there. She hugged Naruto as hard as she could, smothering her face in his black shirt and crying small thank yous. Naruto's eyes softened as he wrapped his arms around the small cat girl, realizing why this meant so much to her. He didn't know the specifics, but he knew that senjutsu or someone who used it had been the cause of something rather traumatic in her life that scarred her enough to cause her hesitance to use what she was naturally supposed to. In a way, she was afraid of what was essentially a rather huge part of herself, and his heart went out to her as he knew that feeling all too well. To fear something that was with you since birth was in a way the same as being frightened of yourself, and that was never a healthy thing for the psyche. Kaneko on the other hand was overcome with emotion. She may have been small when it happened to her, but she knew her sister like no other and so knew that what people had said happened was not the full truth. Nonetheless, she had seen what Senjutsu had caused and was afraid of what else it could cause. To see someone like Naruto so effortlessly use it and still maintain such a calm aura around him meant that he knew the positives and negatives to such a powerful skill. If he could teach her to do the same, then she would never have to fear the what if situations anymore. I usually don't have a problem with people following me, but come on, at least try a little harder to hide yourself, Naruto said as he sat in his usual meditative spot in the park. It had been a few days since he had met with Rias and her peerage, and outside of helping Kaneko use Senjutsu, he had gotten rather bored as all they were doing was helping Issei get used to being a devil and such. He'd have no problem if that meant fighting stray devils and whatnot, but no, that meant educating Issei, by having him do menial labor. It had been funny at first to watch the pervert toil away, but even that lost its comedic value after the third time. Office wasn't much of a source of entertainment as she was rather content to silently follow him. It was fun trying to get some form of reaction out of her by pranking her and even trying to ally tease her, but not once had she done more than lift an eyebrow at him. It hurt his pride as a prankster to know that she was unaffected, but he'd be damned if he couldn't get some form of reaction from her. Back to the present, he had been sitting in the same spot meditating, and a somewhat familiar signature had been watching him the whole time. At his calling out, the formerly hidden presence made itself known by walking out of the bushes that surrounded Naruto's little sanctuary. The man appeared to be in his 20s with blonde bangs and the rest of his being a light brown. He was dressed in black slacks with a reddish coat that covered his torso and fell to his shins. It seemed that was all he wore, as his bare chest was plain to see. "Darn, didn't think you could sense me that easily," the man said as he chuckled nervously, scratching the back of his head. Naruto lazily opened one eye to look at the man. "Not really in the mood to chit-chat as you've ruined my meditation time, so get to the point. What do you want?" In an instant the man's whole demeanor seemed to change as he took on a serious look and crossed his arms across his chest. "What do you want with the Gremory heir and her peerage? I can only guess that you care because Akeno is part fallen angel, which means she is either your daughter or somehow related to you." The man narrowed his eyes even further. "How do you know that?" Naruto sighed as he opened both eyes and assumed a standing position across from the man. "Same way I can tell that you're also a fallen angel. Though it seems Akeno's devil side has overtaken and diluted her fallen side. Why are you here? I can tell you're strong, very strong, yet I can't tell if you're a devil, angel, or human. So whose side are you on?" questioned the man. Naruto smirked as he flashed to just behind the man, shocking him. "None. I'm just here to have a little bit of fun, fallen angel Azazel." And with another flash of crimson, Naruto was gone. "Rainier," Azazel called out. In a flurry of black feathers, the same scantily clad fallen angel who Naruto had punted through several trees several nights before appeared before Azazel, on her knees and head bowed. "Yes, Azazel-sama?" she intoned. "Track him, find out what you can and report back to me directly, and no one else. And do not disobey me like last time," Azazel said in a steely tone. The man had caused something he hadn't felt in centuries: fear. He had been able to get behind him without it even registering to Azazel, and in that one moment the redhead could have very well ended his life. And Azazel was no slouch when it came to power. Hi. And in another flurry of black feather, Rainier was off to follow her orders. "That man, how did he know who I am? How could such a powerful being appear out of nowhere without anyone having any kind of knowledge on him? This does not sit well with me." Naruto whistled in interest as he saw Rias and her peerage fight a stray devil that had been murdering quite a few humans. That in and of itself wasn't so interesting, as the thing was so weak he could have killed it without even lifting a finger. No, what was interesting to him was finding out that Akeno was actually quite a bit of a sadist. He had to resist the more animalistic side of him that was screaming to take her when the busty brunette moaned in ecstasy. It didn't help that the last few times that he had met with the Gremory group, both Akeno and Rias saw fit to make their relationship much more physical. That didn't mean, though, he wouldn't turn them down if they asked, but more of them smothering him in between their bountiful bosoms and being generally more clingy with him. Ever since he had started training her, Kaneko had been much the same, occupying his lap whenever she could and acting much more cat-like than even Rias had seen before. It probably didn't help that he fed her sweet tooth as well. Must be a Neko thing as Matabi had quite the sweet tooth as well, often hoarding massive amounts of pocky, cake, and other such treats. In the past he would have freaked out over all the female attention he was receiving, but after the Fourth War settled down he had spent quite a bit of time with plenty of beautiful women, many whom openly admitted to wanting to have his children. He had even entertained the idea of reviving the Uzumaki clan with many of those same women, but still the fact that he would long outlive them and his children greatly unsettled him. And he hated that. For all his life all he had ever wanted was family, someone to love and someone who returned that love. He could have that, but in return would have to watch as they fell victim to the ravages of time as he remained untouched. In many ways he had traded away the burden of being a Jinchuriki for the burden of being something else entirely, something not exactly human. As he pondered on this his heart clenched in pain, his face grew somber, and his normally bright sapphire eyes lost their shine, becoming chips of ice. Due to him being an Uzumaki and the former container for an empath, his chakra would often reflect his emotions, and this was one of those times. This was why he had the uncanny ability of bringing out the best in people. His chakra and natural optimism would literally worm their way into others and begin affecting them, almost making them addicted to it. This power was what had earned him the moniker, Konoha's most surprising shinobi. Ophis, who stood behind him, looked in curiosity as the normally blaze-like inferno that was Naruto's aura seemed to drop several degrees, feeling now like the icy colds of the tundra. She wondered why this seemed to bother her. Down below them the Gremory group felt it as well, though the girls felt it much more. Having spent so much time in his company and being so close to him meant that they had grown attracted to his normally warm aura. To feel that same aura that usually brought feelings of joy now feel like the coldest iceberg unsettled them. What shocked them even more was that this seemed to have a heavy affect them and now were themselves feeling slightly saddened. They looked up to see Naruto and Ophis on a rooftop above them and saw what had brought the change. Naruto's demeanor had changed from his normally laid-back or happy visage to one of detachment and frigidness. Before anyone could say anything to Naruto, the redhead, he was gone in a crimson flash. Elemental Nations, Naru-kun? Thought an orange-haired beauty who was clothed in a crimson kimono with a familiar swirl on the back. She clutched her chest as she felt her heart clench in pain. Similarly, a usually grinning Dango lover was shocked by the same feeling. Those around her looked in concern as her usually cheery demeanor turned to one of pain and hurt. Sitting in a familiar ramen stand, a long-haired ravenette narrowed her onyx eyes as she too felt it, and she knew why. I will kill anyone who has hurt my Naruto-kun. Sitting in an office in Kirigakure, a busty auburn-haired beauty looked up as she felt something off. Unfortunately, a certain shinobi with an eye patch chose that moment to walk in with a stack of paperwork. It was only thanks to his years of being a shinobi and having been in the company for so long that he narrowly managed to avoid having his face melted off via lava. Back in Konoha, a beautiful woman with striking red hair looked up from her gardening with an angry glint in her eyes. "Who has hurt my Sochi-kun?" Dimensional gap. Great Red raised a non-existent eyebrow at the demeanor of the only being who could actually challenge him. Nonetheless, he shrank his form to a much more suitable size for his spar with Naruto. In truth, he was looking forward to it, as when they had first battled he was unused to the way Naruto fought and the things he could do. It had also been a few centuries since he last had to use more than a small percentage of his power. As such, he had begun training like he had when he was a rambunctious hatchling. This time Naruto Uzumaki, the transcendent sage, would not so easily best Great Red, the true dragon. With a mighty roar, Red unleashed a massive beam twice the size of anything he had used in their last fight. With nary a thought and a cold look, Naruto summoned a massive Rasen Shuriken in his hand and tossed it with such force the very air around it was distorted and the sound was slow due to this. When Naruto's signature jutsu met Red's massive beam of energy, something unexpected happened. The beam managed to halt the massive shuriken, unlike before when it would simply carve a path through it. With a flap of his wings, Red seemed to disappear to the naked eye, only to reappear behind Naruto, a scaled fist slamming into the back of the Uzumaki's skull with such power that his face slammed through the earth with enough force to make a hole in it. As Red's scaled fist met Naruto's skull, the explosion of their two previous techniques rocked the landscape not feet away. Naruto didn't let this deter him though, and donkey kicked Red in his soft belly with enough force to expel spittle and blood from Red's maw. In a flash, Naruto picked himself up and spun around, Rasengan in hand, and slammed the swirling ball into Red's snout, sending the true dragon spinning away. Naruto refused to give his opponent a chance to breathe and immediately went through a series of seals before calling out, Kaden. Hosenka no Jutsu, Fire Release. Phoenix Sage Fire. Red looked up as several fireballs burning a bright orange sped towards him, intent on reducing him to ash. Red scoffed before he roared with enough power behind it that the sound made a concussive wave of air that collided with the fireballs, and due to the amount of energy put into the roar, the flames were extinguished as they met the airwave. Red then lashed his tail out behind himself, narrowly missing Naruto, who had flashed behind the dragon god. Still, Naruto continued and finished the chain of hand seals he had been going through. Futon. Atsugai, Wind Release, Pressure Damage. Red was unable to dodge the attack as it was too close, and so was exposed to the massive amount of wind force that pummeled him into the ground. Naruto tried to capitalize on this by summoning two Rasengans, intent on smashing them into the back of the crimson-scaled dragon. He quickly had to abandon this plan, though, as Red's tail made itself known once more in an attempt to stab through his chest cavity. Naruto of course dodged, but soon realized his mistake as the tail then wrapped itself around him, trapping his arms at his side. Before he could find a way out of the situation, Red rose from his prone position and the tail brought Naruto in, where Red slammed his scaled forehead against Naruto's, dazing the redhead. Taking advantage of Naruto being dazed, Red used his tail to slam the Transcendent into the ground, where he followed it up by stomping his feet into Naruto's abdomen, crushing several ribs in the process. Red then pumped his wings and flew up above Naruto and unleashed another beam of energy straight down. The true dragon narrowed his eyes as he saw that Naruto had not moved from the spot and if anything waited for the beam to strike. That's when he saw it, the foxy grin that made his baser instincts scream at him. The beam collided with the ground, exploding on impact and kicking up a veritable dust storm. It was in this dust storm that Great Red sensed it, several its actually. He was then bombarded from every direction by punches and kicks. While this would have been troublesome for most, Red's thick scaled hide protected him from most physical damage, and the fists and feet that impacted with him felt like nothing more than nuisances. Red's anger eventually clouded his better judgment as he grew more and more frustrated that he could not counterattack as the hits were unpredictable. Down below and out of the dust storm, Naruto stood with his arms crossed as one of his clones used his high affinity to wind to keep the dust storm going. Naruto knew how tough Red's scales were and that he would need to use chakra to actually do any damage, but the hits his clones were dealing weren't meant to damage but to aggravate. He had been told various times in his youth that he was a rather irritating person, especially when he was the prank king, and many of his enemies still thought of him as such due to his uncanny ability to derail their plans without an effort. Taking this into mind, he had took his skills in pranking and irritation and incorporated them into his fighting style. What Red was experiencing was what he liked to call the Odakimono no Shikata, Mitsubachi no Mure, Way of the Joker, Swarm of Bees. His cage bunshin would swarm the enemy and cause them to be overcome by irritation, worsening their judgment in battle due to their irritation. Using a cover like the dust storm helped as well, and Great Red, not knowing he could make physical copies of himself, helped even more. Came here to blow off some steam, and just sparring with Red has done just that. Now I know anytime I'm pissed or want to blow shit up to come find Red, haha. With that, Naruto signaled to his clone to stop the dust storm altogether and waited, wishing he had a camera to capture Red's reaction. Red had about had it with the redhead and was now intent on tearing the pest limb from limb. He had tried to escape, but each time was met with a fist to the face. Trying to blow away the dust storm with his wings meant that said appendages would receive several hits. When the dust storm finally did clear, though, what Red saw caused his blood to boil, as standing there with his arms crossed and a smirk on his face was Naruto. Normally he would have questioned how the redhead was fast enough to hit him and then disappear, but his anger overrode that thought process. Uzumaki, I'm going to murder you and use your bones as toothpicks, roared the severely pissed off dragon god. Naruto just grinned his signature foxy grin, a Rasengan forming in his right hand. You're welcome to try, yaw overgrown lizard. With another roar of anger, Great Red flapped his wings and rocketed towards Naruto with such speed he began to blur. Naruto, though, just shook his head. He knew that Great Red was the only being in existence who could possibly challenge him, but Red's body was still not used to fighting for so long at such levels. Red hadn't had a decent fight or reason to flex his power in centuries, and so he had become lax and unfamiliar with his own power. Naruto, on the other hand, had not months ago come out of a war that had pushed him, mentally and physically, to his limits and beyond even that. Given time, he and Red would be able to fight for possibly days on end, destroying the landscape that was the dimensional gap. It was already evident that Red had improved by leaps and bounds from their last little spat. Naruto's form blurred only to reappear in front of Great Red, and before the dragon could do much of anything, Naruto was underneath him, a Rasengan inches from his underbelly. Red's last thought before the ball hit was, "The little brat fucking played me, damn it." Red was rocketed into the air by the swirling chakra ball, but that wasn't the end of it. Naruto appeared in crimson flash above him, 2 more Rasengans in hand. To Red's further shock, 3 more Narutos appeared, each with 2 Rasengans in their hands. The real Naruto called out, "Rasenrenden, spiraling barrage." And all Red knew from there was pain. Pain. When Naruto flashed back to his home, he had expected to see Office there, maybe even Rias, and he wasn't surprised to find that they were indeed there. He was surprised to see Akaino as well as Kaneko though. The people they were with surprised Naruto even more, for standing there in his living room was his mother, Kurama, Anko, Mei, and some girl with long raven black hair. What made him uneasy was that each side was looking at each other like they were enemies that stood in the way of what they wanted. Before Naruto could even get out a confused sound, he was glomped by his mother. The hit woke him up, and so he was able to catch her and hold her up with ease. "Ka-san? But, what, how? Actually, how are the rest of you here?" Kurama took this time to saunter up to Naruto and offer him her own foxy smirk. "Where do you think he got it from?" "That would be me, Naruto-kun." "Already forget that my brothers and sisters dimension traveled as well? Though taking these 4 along for the ride cost me 7 taels instead of the 5 it usually takes." "Well, I'm happy to see you all, but why? I thought you all wanted to stay in the elemental nations." All Naruto received was deadpan looks from the girls. He sweat dropped and rubbed the back of his nervously, "Right, stupid question, sorry. But really, why now of all times?" "That would be a combination of my fault and your mother's, Naruto-kun," Kurama explained. Kushina took this time to stand on her own 2 feet and admire the man her son had become. "Well, as you know, Kurama is a rather powerful empath, and being her container meant that you inherited some of that. Not enough to make you an empath yourself, but enough that your emotions are very important to you and your power. Due to the unique nature of Uzumaki chakra and its adaptability, it took this link to your emotions and connected them. Your chakra and emotions became linked in such a way that one would affect the other. Due to this, your genes once more mutated this power into a weapon, as it saw that it could be a useful tool to you, just like my chakra chains. Your chakra and emotions have the ability to seep into others and begin to influence that person. When you're happy, so are those around you. When you are mad, so are those around you. It was quite literally your determination and belief in others that brought out the best in your comrades and those around you in such situations." Naruto nodded along as he took a seat where an all too happy Kaneko seated herself in his lap. All present glared at the girl for a minute. Kushina coughed to regain herself and continued. "Normally, without you around, this affect would wear off almost instantly. Depending on how long you spent around that person, though, they may become addicted to the feeling of your emotions, being that you yourself are such an emotive person. We were special cases though. Both myself and Kurama had been sealed in you for the better part of 17 years. You spent quite some time with Anko here, and you knew Saya here for almost as long as we were sealed in you. As such, we became connected to you in such a way that when you were in pain a few hours ago, we also felt it," Kushina said with a breath at the end. Naruto merely raised his hand as if he were in a classroom, asking permission to speak. Kushina giggled and nodded her head. "Am I to assume the raven-haired girl is Saya?" Kushina and the others nodded at that. "Am I also to assume that Saya is actually Sasuke, who had to hide her gender away for some convoluted reason or another?" Again he was met with nods, albeit slightly nervous ones. Naruto hemmed at that before he nodded. He then picked up Kaneko from his lap and placed her on the seat next to him. He then stared at his house's guests before he said, "Nighty-night," and fainted on the spot. Kaneko, Rias, and Akaino began to slightly panic. Mei glared at Saya, who grew a tick mark. Anko began to roll around the floor laughing, and both Kushina and Kurama could only sweat drop. Kushina turned to Kurama and said, "Well, that went better than we thought, nay?" A few minutes later we find Naruto awake once more, massaging his forehead as he tried to sort all that had happened in the past few minutes. First he finds out that in a weird way people could almost get high off of just being around him, and the person who he had considered a brother for a great portion of his young life was actually a girl. A very attractive girl, but a girl nonetheless. He turned to the female Uchiha. "I'm not even gonna bother asking why you hid it for so long or why you chose to release it after I left, because frankly it's probably something that will cause me even more of a headache than I already have." Naruto then turned to his mother, "And how the hell are you alive? If I remember right, you had gotten stabbed by a certain someone's claw and only a portion of your spirit was kept in me, but that too faded after you helped me tame Kurama-su. What the fuck?" Naruto received a smack to the back of his head in response. "Language, young man." He stared back at her blankly. "No offense, but I think it's a bit too late to be trying to lecture me like that. I love you, Mom, I do, but I know next to nothing about you, and you only came to me well into my life, after I had struggled to survive for the first 10 or so years of my life." Kushina bowed her head in sadness and shame as she knew he was right. There was no logical way that she could just come back into his life and hope he would accept her as his mother with open arms. Kurama had told her what kind of life her child had led, and she was surprised he hadn't snapped or became so jaded as to be emotionless. The fact that he was alive and able to smile was a miracle. "I know, Soch, Naruto-kun. But I still want to be a part of your life now that I'm here, and if eventually you come to accept me as your mother, then great, but if not, well, as long as I can be with you in your life and make you happy, then I'll be happy too." Naruto got up from his seat and wrapped his mother in his arms. Kushina gripped his shirt with her fists and began to cry at their situation. She meant what she said, but that didn't make it hurt any less that she could possibly never be the mother that she had wanted to be for Naruto. A selfish part of her blamed Minato for her current position, but deep down she knew that she could have very well stopped it. In fact, there were a lot of things she and Minato could have done to save Naruto from the life he had, but that was in the past. What if? And that's all it would ever be for them. Once Kushina calmed down enough, Naruto asked again, "So how are you alive?" Kushina wiped her tears and cleared her throat. "Well, it ties into the Uzumaki bloodline again. You see, it is the reason that your body had all the benefits you did from housing Kurama was because it saw what Kurama could offer and so used that. Much the same, it saw what I could offer and so decided to take some of my abilities and give them to you. That's why you can now use the chakra chains, and that's also why your hair changed colors. At first both your ideals and situation needed your father's namikaze genes to survive. At the time his genes better suited you and so your body adjusted. When we met and after the struggle to tame Kurama, your bloodline thought that your Uzumaki genes would be more useful to you, and so it used my pure-blooded Uzumaki genes as a base and went from there. It also helped that at that time you changed your views from those of your fathers who embodied the will of fire to something more in line with that of Uzu. Like I said before, your emotions play a big part in your body and such, and so when you took on the ideals of the Uzumaki clan, your body changed to reflect that. I still don't see what that has to do with you being alive. Ow." Naruto wailed as he once more received a smack to the back of the head. "I'm getting to that, to Bane." Naruto sat there and grumbled about violent women running his life or some other. Kushina then continued, "As you know, the Uzumaki bloodline is adaptability. When yours took part of my genes as a base for you, it unknowingly took a part of my soul in order to do so. This wouldn't have been anything special if it wasn't due to the mass amounts of Yuki you were surrounded by. When you let Kurama have free run of your body and you left it, your body adjusted once more. It flowed pure Yuki in you, making your body a demon if briefly. The chakra that you left behind had to go somewhere. It chose my soul fragment due to familiarity. When you took back your body, it saw the chakra my soul fragment had as unnecessary, and so it was ejected from your body. It would have dispersed into the world had it not been for my loose sense of consciousness holding it all together. From there I absorbed leftover chakra and Yuki from the war, and voila." Kushina finished with a grin. "So as it stands, you're pretty much just a mass of chakra like a Biju then?" "Well, I would have been, yes, but unlike the Biju I had a physical body beforehand. I found said body and coursed the chakra I had as well as my conscious mind into it. The chakra kick-started our bloodline, and from there you can guess what happened. Honestly, this all sounds like some Deus Ex Machina shit, but I just came from another dimension where I fought a dragon god. The fuck do I know about logic? Naruto chuckled. So Naruto-kun, who are these, people? Akano asked as she smooshed Naruto's head in between her breasts. Naruto wouldn't have minded staying like that, but knew that several of the room's occupants were currently trying to kill Akano with just their eyes, and Saya may just end up doing exactly that. With that in mind, he pried himself from her grip, which the sadist pouted at, and stood in between the two factions. Well, you know who the other redhead is now. My mom, Kushina Uzumaki. The orange-haired vixen is Kurama, or as you might know her, the Kyuubi no Kitsune. At that the girls turned and glared out of jealousy and a little bit of fear. Kyuubi was a well-known name in their world. Said to have been on par with the both Ophis and Great Red, she was truly a fearsome tale. The fact that it was said she could cause entire landscapes to change with but a flick of her tail was a scary thought indeed. It also didn't help that in front of them was a statuesque woman who looked as beautiful as she was powerful. Standing only a few inches shorter than Naruto's impressive 6 foot, she had long dark orange hair that fell to her firm butt, with some of that hair separated into 9 ponytails. She wore a small amount of black eyeliner that made her crimson-colored eyes stand out even more. She also wore a bright red lipstick on her plump lips. Covering her was a deep red-colored yukata, the same shade as Naruto and Kushina's hair. An obi of sapphire blue was wrapped around her waist. The yukata did nothing to hide her figure as it ended just above her knees, exposing her long tanned legs. It also showed a small amount of her cleavage, which were easily the size of Rias' own massive mammaries. All in all, the woman that stood before them was a level of beauty that so few ever saw, though Naruto's luck seemed to allow him to be surrounded by such beauties. Lucky fucker. The purple-haired saddie. Wait, oh shit. And that's when Naruto realized how much trouble he was really in. He could by no means allow Anko and Akano to get close. It spelled nothing but disaster for him. Coughing, he continued, the purple-haired woman is Anko, the woman in blue is Mei, and the raven-haired girl her name was Sasuke, now Saya. The Gremory group plus Ophis stared down the Uchiha as he had told them of his odd relationship with him, well, her now, but yay. They did not like the fact that said raven-haired girl had tried to murder Naruto on several occasions. What didn't help was despite that Naruto admitted he was still rather close with the Sharingan user after he had beat the revenge and power-hungry attitude out of him. Damn, that's confusing. What made it worse was that the former male made one hell of a wife-female. Her long raven hair fell to her mid-back with some bangs swept across her forehead. Framing her pale face and accentuating her eyes was a small amount of eyeliner. She wore no other makeup, leaving her flawless skin for all to see. She wore a loose blue long-sleeve shirt with a fan of sorts on her back. The shirt was loose enough to expose a good amount of cleavage, and even though she wasn't as busty as Kurama or Rias, didn't mean she was small-chested by any means. It also helped that she was rather young and could still grow even more, though her life as a kunoichi had filled out her curves in all the right places. Her body was slim, which suited her fast-paced style of fighting. She wore form-fitting black pants that stopped at her ankles, showing her blue ninja sandals. Strapped diagonally across the small of her back was a plain-looking ninjutsu. Looking at her, she was the perfect assassin, beautiful and seductive but deadly as well. He then turned to the kunoichi. The busty redhead is Rias. The girl with the ribbon in her hair is Akano, the small girl with white hair is Kaneko, and Kurama probably knows the gothic loli, she's Ophis. As Naruto introduced Ophis, Kurama began laughing hysterically, to the point where tears were coming out of her eyes. Everyone stared at her questioningly, but what was even stranger was that Ophis actually looked aggravated by the demoness. When Kurama managed to get her breath back, she answered the unasked question. The reason that Ophis is a loli right now is because she lost a bet to me a few centuries ago and I had completely forgotten about it till now. Soon Naruto and Anko joined Kurama in her hysterical laughing. Kushina was giggling. Mei was shaking her head and laughing. And the normally stoic Saya was trying to cover up her own chuckles with her hands. Everyone knew not to bet against either Kurama or Naruto. No matter what, you always lost. Even if all the odds were stacked against them and logic was on your side. Some had tried to rationalize why, and the only theory that made any sort of sense was that Lady Luck wanted to get into Naruto's pants. After everyone had regained their breath, Naruto asked, "What was the bet anyways?" "Honestly, I don't remember. Something about making Baka Red nervous or something, I think. Though she lost and so has had to parade around as a loli ever since." Kurama then turned a foxy grin to Office and said, "What's left on the bet? Another century or two, right?" Shockingly, a tick mark appeared on Office and she ground out through gritted teeth, "Yes." Naruto bowed at Kurama's feet. "How did you do that? I've been trying to get a reaction from her for almost a month now." Kurama's grin made it clear just how much of a vixen she really was. She kneeled down to the sage's level and trailed one of her well-manicured fingers underneath Naruto's chin, forcing him to gaze into her slit eyes. "And what do I get in return, Naru-kun?" The amount of willpower Naruto had at his beck and call was just as massive as his chakra reserves were. It was this same force of will that had won him many battles and allies. This will had toppled corrupt empires, saved countless lives, and had even brought peace to the shinobi world. That being said, Naruto was the student of two perverts. He was also a 17-year-old male with some slight demonic tendencies that he got from the same vixen who was now quite obviously inviting him to do things that had toppled whole empires and civilizations. None could blame the lucky bastard for almost giving in to his baser instincts. Almost being the keyword, because right as he was about do so, Kurama was sent through one of the walls of his home thanks to a chakra-powered kick courtesy of one Kushina Uzumaki. "Paws off my Naruto-kun, you horny vixen." At that declaration, Anko immediately stopped laughing at the expense of Kurama and leveled a glare at the Uzumaki princess. Before the war she would have never dreamed of challenging Kushina, but thanks to Naruto killing off Orochimaru, Kabuto and then releasing her from the curse seal's hold, she had been able to return to training without worrying about any side effects. She was by no means an S rank like Saya, but she could now give Kakashi a run for his money. She also knew that Kushina hadn't yet managed to regain all the strength and power that had earned her the moniker of Chishio no Benihime, Crimson Princess of Blood. "Oi, the hell do you mean you're Naruto-kun? Pretty sure he ain't into incest." Naruto merely coughed and blushed at that. He had to admit that under different circumstances he would have jumped at the chance to be with a beauty like his mother. He could see why his father had fallen for her. Before any could answer, Kurama came running back into the house where she returned the favor to Kushina, sending the redhead through another wall. "They're not related anymore. Naru-kun's bloodline has messed with his body so much that I doubt he could even be related to his younger self anymore." Naruto again blushed at this. Kushina appeared in front of Kurama ready to pummel the demoness, but both were interrupted by a certain Uchiha's appearance. She leveled a Sharingan-enhanced glare at both of them before she backhanded the two of them back through the holes they had made. She then spat out, "Both of you are kidding yourselves. He deserves someone closer to his age. Besides, between the two of us we can rebuild both the Uchiha and Uzumaki clans." Saya soon joined Kushina and Kurama thanks to Anko using the Seneashu to grab her ankles and toss her harshly through a wall. "PFT, you're nowhere near old enough to give him the time I could," Anko boasted, winking at Naruto. Mei then slammed an open palm into Anko's back, sending her through another wall as well. "True, but I think I have more to offer him, don't you think, Uzumaki-kun?" When said this, she put her arms under her impressive bust, accentuating them even more. She was then treated to Akino's lightning energy coursing through her body. The girls who had made their way back into the house both glared and gazed at the Gremory group in anger and curiosity. As far as they knew, these girls were just some weak sluts trying to get their man. Naruto smacked his fist into his palm. "Right, forgot to tell you girls that they're devils." He then sweat dropped when he felt the Kunoichi begin preparing their chakra for use, Kurama calling upon her Yuki, and the Gremory group taking battle stances. "I may be a knucklehead, but I'm not a complete dumbass with a death wish. No way in hell am I getting in between these girls." Naruto then spun on his foot and began walking to his bedroom. He then called out, "Bedrooms are upstairs. There's also a training area in the backyard. Don't kill each other." All the girls kept a battle-ready stance and a glare leveled at the others present, only nodding slightly to show that they had heard him. "Hope they don't destroy my house. Would be troublesome to have to make enough clones to rebuild it." We find Naruto sitting at what was left of his table, in what was left of his kitchen. It seems like the girls had eventually taken their fight outside to the training ground, but on the way there they had decided to warm up. What surprised him even more was that they were all knocked out in one of the bedrooms, snoring away like they hadn't decimated his home. With a sigh, several Narutos poofed into existence, and without even having to say anything they were off to get the supplies needed to fix the house. Naruto hadn't been able to meditate these past few days due to interruptions, and now he doubted his home would be a good place for that, so he was off in a crimson flash to his spot in the park. Of course, being Naruto, his short meditation was once more interrupted by the appearance of yet another fallen angel. He knew it was the same fallen who he had fought when he met Rias, and figured that Azazel had sent her to spy on him. That much didn't bother him, as neither her nor Azazel could pose much of a threat to him or most of his house guests. It was more irritating than anything, if he was to be honest. Is it too much to ask to go one day without being bothered? And at that exact moment he felt the appearance of a rather strong angel not too far from him. At this his eye began to twitch just slightly, yet still Naruto remained stubborn and stayed in his meditative position. Nope, not doing it. I am sitting right here and meditating. His eye then began to twitch rather violently as the power source grew brighter and stronger. Nah, not happening. I am not getting involved in anything else, Naruto stubbornly thought. When the source of the power was literally smack in his face and he could feel whoever was responsible breathing into his face, was when Naruto finally broke. "Fuck you, Kami-sama, you sadistic ass," Naruto shouted as he rolled from his meditative position to laying on his back, holding up two middle fingers to the sky. When he heard cute giggling coming from the person responsible, he had to resist the urge to just get up and leave. If I open my eyes right now and see an attractive woman in front of me, I am getting up and leaving this fucking dimension. Naruto cracked an eye open, and the sight before him highly irritated him. Standing before him was a woman who seemed to radiate all that was good in life. She had golden blonde hair that almost had a glowing quality. Her golden hair fell to her mid-back and was held out of her face by a halo-like headband, showing her pale and smooth face. Her face was a beautiful heart shape with sapphire blue eyes that looked to be even brighter than his own blue eyes. Her figure was slim yet curvaceous, not as curvy as Rias or Kurama, but more of a modest size that fit her body perfectly. She looked to be the type of beauty that many artists had devoted their whole lives to trying to paint or sculpt. Of course, being an angel, this made sense. After taking all this in, Naruto got up and dusted himself off before spinning on his heel and calmly walking in the other direction without looking back. The blonde-haired beauty merely quirked her head before shrugging and following the red head. Naruto walked, keeping his focus in front of him, while his companion happily gazed at everything around them like a tourist. For minutes they walked this, neither of them saying a word. The silence was broken by the blonde-haired beauty. "So where are we going?" Naruto's eye twitched as her voice was a perfect sound any choir director would die to have it. "To my house, or what's left of it." "Why? I need some help." "With what?" "Leaving this dimension." "Why?" "Because Kami hates me." "I wouldn't say that. You are Kami's chosen after all, Naruto-kun." "I'm not even going to comment on that." "Well, my name is Gabriel, Naruto-kun." "Nice to meet you, Gabriel. You know, you're very interesting, especially to the higher-ups. Kami, Inari, and Lady Luck just won't stop talking about you." "You don't say. I can see why too." At that, Naruto stopped, the now named Gabriel doing the same. He then turned his head to look at her, almost as if he was debating something important. He then shook his head, "Nope, not doing it." All he got in response was another cute giggle. "Doing what, silly?" "Getting wrapped up in whatever adventure you'd eventually lead me on, causing the both of us to fall in love with each other due to the machinations of some sadistic higher beings who like seeing me squirm." Another giggle. "Silly, I already love you." The cheerfulness and sheer bluntness in those simple words stopped Naruto dead in his tracks. In fact, he was so shocked that his brain had literally shut down and was now trying to reboot itself. While this happened, Gabriel was content to wrap herself around Naruto's arm and lean into him, being a little too short for her to lay her head on his shoulder. What?" was Naruto's intelligent reply as his brain managed to boot up again. At this point he really couldn't find it in him to bother feeling any sort of irritation or other feeling at the golden-haired angel wrapping herself around his arm. "Well, see, some of the major gods have chosen champions. You being Kami's chosen was why you were hailed as the child of prophecy in your world, the one who would either bring true peace or destroy the world," Gabriel said, her voice becoming slightly lower and just a little more serious. And I fulfilled that. I brought down Akatsuki and killed both Obito and Orochimaru, Kabuto, whatever. Peace came to the nations. Indeed you did. In fact you did so in a way that shocked many deities. Even Kami-sama had thought you would have to follow your ancestors' footsteps and do battle with the Jubi, eventually sealing it in yourself. But by choosing to work yourself to the bone after your battle with Nagato you once more altered the course of your fate. I never did like the idea of fate, Naruto said chuckling. Gabriel giggled into her hand, yes we know. In fact fate isn't too happy that you keep destroying all of her well-worked plans. Guess my name still holds true, nay? Indeed it does. And it will continue to represent who you really are until the end of your days, probably even past that. But back on topic. It may sound rather childish but each deity likes to keep tabs on their champion so they they want to brag about them, and with you having Kami, Inari, Susanoo, and Lady Luck raving about you and Fate highly upset with you, well word spread. You became one of the most watched champions. We've seen every battle, every high and every low of your life from the day you were born to the day you left the nations. So I was like some reality show for you all? Naruto asked, slightly offended at the thought he was just some form of amusement for some childish gods. No, your life ensnared us all. Naruto, we saw you lose your Gigi. The pain you felt at losing Jiraiya. Gabriel stood in front of him, staring into his eyes. At remembering the loss of some of his most precious people, Naruto's own eyes saddened. Gabriel saw this and cupped his face with her hands. We also saw your triumphs. Finally becoming a genin, your battle with Gaara, meeting your mother, and single-handedly stopping Pain, who had all but decimated the entirety of Konoha by himself. Naruto, I watched it all. I saw you grow from the little boy who just wanted someone to love him into the man who destroyed centuries of hatred, pain, and suffering. The man who shouldered the weight of the world all so that no other would have to experience the sadness he had as a child. I love you, Naruto Uzumaki. With that, Gabriel stood on her toes to give her the little extra height boost needed to plant her lips firmly on those of the shocked redhead. On Naruto's part, he couldn't help but be shocked. Sure, he had plenty of women want his babies or some other thing or hint that they cared for him, but no one, not even Kurama, had so boldly declared their feelings for him. For many it was a sort of unspoken thing, but for someone to actually confess to him how they felt was a first for him. Fuck it, might as well enjoy it while I can. Despite both of them being immortal, they did still need air and so had to part. When they did, Gabriel wrapped her arms around Naruto and snuggled her head into his chest, sighing contentedly. He made it even more romantic by nuzzling his face into the top of her head, taking in the smell of her and wrapping his own arms around her smaller form. The two of them spent quite some time holding each other in the middle of the park. Many of the older people who frequented this part of the park, due to the various flowers and trees planted throughout as well as it being a little farther from the playground where the kids played, smiled at the scene. To them it looked like a married couple who were just enjoying the other's presence, and Naruto would be hard-pressed to disagree. Again, he had plenty of female attention aimed at him. Those same females were probably more than willing to follow him to hell and back if need be. He was grateful for that, but it seemed that all of them would rather hint or fight the competition than say how they truly felt. Even then, though, he knew he could do nothing about those feelings due to his immortality. And there it was, that stabbing pain in his chest. The pain caused him to grip Gabriel tighter so that he could maybe just hold on to the moment for just a little longer. For being the one responsible for bringing peace to the elemental nations, you sure are silly, the angel said from his chest. Naruto pulled away and raised an eyebrow at the rather odd comment. I know why you're hurting and why after this you were going to turn me down, she said, a smile still present. You're afraid of what you've become. You're sad that you'll never get the family that you wanted, all because you don't want to have to deal with watching that family fade to dust. The red-haired Uzumaki turned his gaze to the floor at hearing that. It was true after all. He had seen too much death in his young life already and did not want to ever experience the loss of someone close to him ever again. It had almost torn him apart when Sarutobi died during Orochimaru's invasion. When Jiraiya had died at the hands of Nagato, he had nearly lost it. No one, not even Kurama, was able to console him. He had spent hours either locked in his apartment or sitting in front of the perv's grave, doing nothing. His once bright blue eyes had dimmed and lost all life. Sarutobi had been a pseudo-grandfather to him, but he had been too busy with his duties to actually spend time with him. He had spent years with Jiraiya. The man, despite being a pervert, was actually a man of honor and pride. He had showed Naruto what it meant to be both a shinobi and a man. The white-haired Sannin had taken him to festivals, showed him the wonders of the world, and taught him what others had not. He didn't do so out of pity or regret but because he truly wanted to. He spent time with Naruto not because he was obligated to but because he wanted to. The man was the father he never had growing up. Tsunade had been the one to finally save him from the depression. She had lost someone dear to her heart when Jiraiya died. She felt guilty as well, having been the one to practically send him to his death. The two had held the other and grieved together, releasing all the tears and pent-up grief that they had been holding in. Tsunade had been close to drinking herself to death and Naruto had all but shut himself off from the world. Together they helped the other get back on their feet. It also helped that Tsunade was the mother he had never had. She too would spend time with him when she could and actively tried to help him learn non-ninja related things like manners, the fine art of drinking, and even helped him with girls. After Jiraiya's death he had actually taken to calling Tsunade his Ka-san, and she in turn would refer to him as her Sochi. Even still he never wanted to experience that pain again. He had actually contemplated taking his own life but knew all efforts would be fruitless thanks to Kurama. That had darkened his mood even more. Now it was even worse as he wasn't just hard to kill anymore, he was nigh impossible to kill and was immune to the ravages of time. Like I said, you're silly Naruto, Gabriel once more said, pulling him from his thoughts. Kurama can obtain a physical body, and with a little help from you and her Yuki she could retain her immortality and be able to actually bear you children. Sayuri could become a devil and with as strong as she is as a human she could become almost as immortal as you are. Anko and Mei are in much the same boat. Kushina is a chakra construct with a physical body like Kurama and with the help of an angel like me her bloodline could make her as immortal as you are. And well, Ms. Gremory and her little group are already pretty much immortal. How, you? What, was Naruto's reply. Gabriel just pecked him on the cheek before grabbing his hand and leading him back towards his home. I don't mind sharing. I know that you would much rather plunge yourself into the flames of hell before you would ever even consider hurting someone precious to you. Wait, hold on, you're an angel, and if what my sources say are true then you're probably the second strongest angel next to Michael. I doubt you falling from grace for me would bode well for the balance or whatever. Falling in love is not a reason to fall silly. Neither is, though I prefer to think of it as making love. As long as we both love each other and only have to express that love then it's not a sin. I wouldn't need to fall, Gabriel explained. That actually makes sense. Most of the fallen fell because they wanted the pleasure that comes with and did not consider love at all. In such a way would be considered lustful or something and be a sin. Naruto looked at the blonde-haired angel leading him and then put some thought into what she had said about being able to actually be happy and not worry about watching them grow old and die. I still didn't get to finishing meditating. When Naruto introduced Gabriel to the others he had expected another battle royale and indeed that is what was happening right now, but Gabriel was seated happily in his lap watching the battle. This greatly confused him as the girls had wanted nothing more than to tear the angel apart for being so close to their man, but Gabriel had somehow managed to talk her way out of the cat fight and instead had the girls fighting each other. Looks like even angels have a mischievous side to them. Meanwhile a certain black-haired and scantily clad fallen was busy spying on the redhead as per Azazel's request. She patted herself on the back for not being discovered by the powerful being who even had Azazel worried. She was thankful that he was usually surrounded by such powerful people. Their massive auras probably clogged up his senses and allowed for her to get close enough to her target as possible. As of right now she was speeding back to meet up with Azazel so that she could tell him that his former comrade Gabriel was now pursuing a relationship with the target. She knew that information like this would be important and that Azazel would be very happy that she had reported it to him. She did not want him irritated with her yet again. Screw Donasek and Kokabiel. She feared Azazel much more than either of those two dickheads. Her flight was halted though by a certain redhead literally stating in the very air itself. Who was her target? Who she had been spying on, who probably knew that she had been doing so, maybe if she had with him he wouldn't destroy her. Don't worry, I'm not here to kill you or anything. Just want to have a little chat, so if you would? Naruto said, gesturing to the rooftop below them. Rainier was prideful, yes, suicidal she was not though. So it was with weary eyes and a hesitant nod that she landed on the concrete of the roof. To her surprise, Naruto, instead of floating down or even falling down, started walking down as if there were stairs in the air. You like mofucking rhymes, yo? I don't mind you spying on me, because to be frank, neither you nor Azazel pose any real threat to me or to those I hold dear. As such, I propose something that will make it easier on the both of us. You quit trying to be sneaky and hide from me and instead ask any questions you or Azazel want answered. All I ask is that not bother me or my house guests when we ask. Rainier was shocked to the bone to hear this. She held no illusions that she could handle him or his companions. However, for him to be so confident in his own abilities as well as those of said companions to offer such a proposal spoke volumes. He may have outright said that he was stronger than Azazel, but the calmness in which it was said showed that he wasn't being arrogant but simply knew it as if it were a fact. I shall discuss this with Azazel-sama. When he tells me what to do I shall notify you as well, Rainier said shakily. With a wary eye back, Rainier was off once more. However, Naruto felt that something was off. He felt as if by offering this deal he had just made his life that much more complicated. Yet still he felt a new shiver crawl down his spine when a very shy Rias appeared before him. Her being shy set off all kinds of warning bells in his head, as Rias was normally the furthest thing from shy. Can I help you, Rias-chan? Naruto said, though on the inside he was ready to book it at a moment's notice. Naruto-kun. I have a bit of a problem and was wondering if you could help me out with it? Rias said, still refusing to look up at her fellow redhead. That depends, Rias-chan. What kind of a favor is it and how would I help you? With a sigh, Rias finally looked Naruto in his eyes, confidently walked up to him, and grabbed his face in her hands. I like you quite a bit, Naruto-kun, but my family set up a marriage contract that I have been trying to get out of. Can you help me get out of it? Would my helping you involve fighting? Well, it could, but the alternative would be to, well, we could have making the contract null. Rias-chan, look, I think you're a stunning woman really, but I wouldn't want to do that because you need to get out of a contract. Rias, we don't even know each other all that well. At hearing that, Rias looked away and was about ready to walk away but was stopped by Naruto bringing her into a hug, which surprised her enough to make her blush. However, I hate when people force others into doing things they don't want to, so I will help you in any way I can, Naruto said resolutely. He had known Rias for a rather short amount of time, but in that time he had formed an attraction to the busty devil and he had no reason not to. She was stunningly beautiful, strong in her own right, and wasn't afraid to stand her ground and protect those close to her. It was also a big bonus that he loved her hair color. Rias just smiled and snuggled herself into the taller redhead's chest. Thank you, Naruto-kun. As the sun's bright rays began to peek over the horizon and shed its warming light on the world, we find a certain red-haired individual sitting in the lotus position, seated amongst the flowers and trees that made up the grove that lay deep inside the park. As the sun's light illuminated the once dark grove, one could see that the flowers and trees in the grove seemed to glow with a barely seen golden hue. Even the grass had a tint of gold to its deep green color. The animals that flittered in and out of the grove also seemed to be at peace as the birds sang a tune of calm and beauty that showed this tranquility. The normally skittish squirrels could be found seated on the branches of trees and, along with the raccoons and other little critters that called the grove home, almost looked to be meditating in sync with the crimson-haired teen. With each inhale of crisp, cool morning air that the meditating teen took, the animals mimicked him. And they did likewise when he softly exhaled. Even when a group of girls wandered into the grove, wide-eyed and awe-struck at the beautiful scene before them, this tranquility continued on uninterrupted. The girls could literally feel the soft and rhythmic thrumming of the earth underneath their feet, as it was attempting to mimic the heartbeat of the meditating Uzumaki. Inhale, exhale. They watched as the pattern continued and took in the beauty that so few had ever laid eyes on. The small silver-haired Kaneko, could only smile a true smile, seeing the peace and beauty that Senjutsu could bring. Even the normally expressionless Ophis was smiling and taking in the sight before her as, even in her long life, she had never seen someone so connected to nature that the very trees and grass seemed to bow to them. She had seen people command animals and such, yes, but never had she seen nature give it and its children so willingly to someone. Inhale, exhale. Even Gabriel gazed lovingly at the scene before her. Heaven was indeed a beautiful place deserving of all its praises and songs, but what she had just seen was just slightly better than what heaven could ever offer. She had felt nothing but love, peace, joy, and warmth from everything present in the grove. For a moment she had felt the warmth and aura that the true God had once brought to heaven, and realized that it was as if he was approving of her decision to pursue the crimson-haired transcendent. Inhale, exhale. Even Anko, Kushina, and Sayuri were shocked at what they saw in front of them. Sayuri had experienced firsthand the strength that Senjutsu could offer, and were it not for Shizune helping to heal her, she was sure that she would still have the bruises to show for it. To see the same power that had destroyed a chunk of Hai no Kuni, Land of Fire, create such a scene as the one before her was shocking. Inhale, exhale. The three had all heard that Naruto was a perfect sage but had no idea what that truly meant, as the only other perfect sage to have ever walked their lands was the Rikudo Sennin. And it was through this scene that they realized what it really meant to be at one with nature. Inhale, exhale. Kurama could only smile at the sight. She may have been young when she had first seen it, but she could still vaguely recall her father Hagoromo, the Rikudo, meditating in a similar fashion, and seeing Naruto do it brought those memories bubbling up. It reminded her of how similar Naruto was to the sage, and why he had been capable of all that he had been able to do. It also reminded her why she had fallen for the once blonde teen. Inhale, exhale. And with that final breath Naruto slowly opened his eyes, allowing the girls a glimpse of something that made them weak in their knees, especially Kurama. For just the slightest second as Naruto held onto the senjutsu flowing through him, his eyes glowed a royal purple with flecks of crimson dotted throughout. As they each caught his gaze, they felt a surge of warmth and peace flow through their bodies. As Naruto rose from his position in a single fluid motion, the golden glow the girls had thought came from the sun dissipated and the animals let loose one final exhale, the earth letting loose what felt like one final hum as if it was deeply satisfied. The foxy grin Naruto was known for made its way onto his face as he called out, "And what can I do for all of you?" Kaneko was the first to come out of their stupor, and she rushed Naruto, wrapping her arms around Naruto's torso. Naruto only smiled at the Nekosho and patted her head. Sayuri was the first to speak after that. "The angel told us about what you and her talked about, Dobi." Naruto only sweat dropped at her nickname for him. "After all these years and me handing you your ass on a silver platter, you refused to call me anything but Dobi, huh, Teme-chan?" Sayuri scoffed at him, a light red dusting her normally porcelain cheeks. "Fine, whatever, Dobi-kun." Anko was of course busting a gut at the interaction, and when Naruto gave her a curious glance she managed to chuckle out, "The Uchiha is a fucking tsundere." She was then sent to the floor courtesy of Sayuri plating her fist on the purpleate skull. "Shut up, you snake bitch. Oi, fuck you, Uchiha. At least I can admit that I want Gaki's third leg, unlike you." At that everyone present blushed. Naruto surprisingly wasn't one of them, having hung out with Anko so much that her vulgarity went over his head. Kurama was blushing as living inside him for so long she knew how much truth was in that sentence. What shocked everyone was the sudden cry of, "Nya!" that came from one Kaneko. Everyone was wide-eyed as they had never heard or seen her react to anything like that. Of course they were curious as to what it was that had caused her to react like that, especially seeing the dark blush on her face. What they didn't know was that Kaneko had let her curiosity get the better of her and had began discreetly feeling up her senjutsu sensei, and boy was she shocked at what she felt. "Yes, well, that aside, Gabriel did tell us what you talked about. Why you've been distant and why you've been having those bouts of sadness," Mei said as she sashayed her way to Naruto. As she wrapped her arms around the slightly taller teen she smiled and pecked him on the cheek, "And we all have to say that you're silly, Naruto-kun." Kurama smiled and nodded. "Thanks to Gabriel we also know how to fix the problem, and since you offered to help Rias with her problem, we figured that all of us heading to the underworld together would let us kill multiple birds at the same time." "I don't have any say in this, do I?" Naruto said as he shook his head. Anko jumped onto Naruto's back, wrapping her legs around his waist and her arms around his neck. "Nope. Now off to the underworld, my hunky stead. I kinda thought that the underworld would be more, I don't know, flames and screams of agony," Sayuri said with an arched eyebrow. "There's honestly very little difference between us and humans, ya know," Rias said haughtily. "Yay, cause you see humans sprout wings and fire energy from their hands every day," Mei chimed in. "We're not exactly ones to talk, Mei-chan. I mean you can spew lava from your mouth and we consider walking on water normal, Naruto said grinning. Uzumaki-kun is right. You shinobi are closer to being non-human than you are to being human, Akeno said with her smile present as usual. The sadist is right. Considering that Naruto is a demigod in a sense and that Kekkei Genkai are actually genetic mutations brought on by demonic influence in some cases, you all aren't that human to begin with, Kurama said, adding her own 2 cents to the conversation. Yay, I mean, whoa, wait a minute, demigod? Naruto said wide-eyed. He knew he wasn't exactly normal, but demigod was a bit much. I thought you knew? I mean, being that your ancestor the Rikudu is actually the byproduct of a human woman eating part of a god, a primordial god at that, means you were never fully human, and having me sealed into you at birth didn't exactly help that. I know that the Rikudu was the reason the Shinju had turned itself into the Jubi, but never found out why. Well, from what he told us, Biju, his mother had eaten a fruit from the Shinju giving her powers akin to what you call chakra, and so she was able to calm the wars that were happening. However, she hadn't known that she was pregnant, and so she was only given a portion of the fruit's powers. The rest of the powers manifested themselves in the child in the form of the Rinneijin and chakra coils. The Shinju had sensed that someone had taken some of its powers and so became angry and sought to reclaim those powers and turned itself into the monstrous Jubi to do so. Okay, so the Rikudu is himself a demigod then, right? Half human and half god, Sayuri spoke up, highly interested in the story. After all, she was also technically a descendant of the sage as well. Exactly, Kurama said, nodding her assent. Then that means that to some extent the Uzumaki, Uchiha, and Senju have the blood of a god flowing through them, Kushina said, finally speaking up. She had read bits and pieces of the tale from what she had scavenged from the remains of Uzu, but Kurama was basically a first-hand source. Yes and no. They did not get the blood of the Shinju but rather the energy it had. That energy manifested itself in the form of their unique bloodlines. The Uchiha got the eyes of a god, the Sharingan, the Senju got the body of a god, longevity and durability, and the Uzumaki got the blood of a god, mutation and adaptability. Okay, so that all makes sense and is great, but how exactly does that make me a demigod and not Kushina or Sayuri? They're both also descendants of the sage, and Kushina also housed you at one time as well, Naruto questioned. Yes, but they've been diluted by generations of human energy, and Kushina's seal only allowed for the barest minimum of my energy to be made available to her after hers had already begun maturing. You would have also been like them, but having me sealed into you at birth, me being a pretty large chunk of the Shinju, and having my energy siphoned into you thanks to the seal meant that you had almost as much of the Shinju's energy as the Rikudu himself did. You using Senjutsu only boosted that, and well, here you are, Kurama finished. That would explain why his bloodline is so much stronger than any pure-blooded Uzumaki's ever was. Sure, they lived long lives, but even Mito showed signs of aging eventually. He was closer to the source of our Kekkei Genkai, so it was purer, Kushina pondered. The 4 then turned to look back at the rest of the group to see Anko holding her head complaining about a headache, Kaneko munching on Pocky, Gabriel stargazing, and May, Akeno, and Rias comparing bust sizes. Maybe it was for the best that they had all turned away. Too many complicated subjects to understand in one sitting. Oh, you're all done? Then let's get going to my family's home, Rias said, taking the lead along with Akeno. By the way, Naruto-kun, have you thought about how you're going to handle the problem? Naruto could immediately see the nervousness she had. Not because he could sense it, but because it was clearly written all over her beautiful face. Her normally straight face now held slight crinkles of worry, and her eyes would shift every so often as if speaking about it aloud would make it come true. Placing a hand on her shoulder and squeezing slightly, he said, "Don't worry, Rias. I promised you that I would help you, and I've never once broken a promise." TCH, Dobie's right. Though I think he's taking the "to hell and back" part of it too literally if you ask me, the porcelain Uchiha said. She quirked an eyebrow as she noticed that everyone had stopped moving and were openly gawking at her for some odd reason. Even the Gremory group were doing so despite barely knowing her. What? Why are you all staring at me like a bunch of idiots? Sorry, but did you just tell a joke, Sayuri? I have a sense of humor too, you assholes. Sayuri yelled indignantly. Naruto just patted her on the head. Sure ya do, Sayuri, sure ya do. Fuck you, Baka. You wound me with your words, Teme. Naruto said, purposefully being overdramatic by clutching his chest in pain. You've survived my Chidori once, I'm sure you can survive it again, Sayuri said, a tick mark pulsing on her forehead as she called the lightning jutsu to her. Naruto just wrapped her hand in his bigger one, extinguishing the assassination jutsu at the same time, then wrapped his arm around her, bringing the now blushing Uchiha into his side. Come on Teme, don't be like that. Sides, we both know I can still kick your butt around like nothing. Naruto soon found himself embedded in the ground. Sayuri turned a heated look towards the Gremory heiress. Make me a devil now. Dobi is getting his ass handed to him. Rias then pointed a finger to her right, showing that they had already arrived at the Gremory home. Well, mansion seemed a more fitting term. The main building itself was a huge construct of obsidian stone, in a similar style to the castles of the European Victorian era, with its sharp points and various bastions sticking out from the main building itself. A gate of black metal stood as the only entranceway, as a wall of similarly colored stone several tens of feet high and several feet thick wrapped around the castle itself. At intervals of 100 feet or so jutted small lookout towers that would have served as good points for surveillance and such. Overall, the Gremory house looked like a well-fortified place meant for a small village rather than for one family. Era bucko, I just remembered that we didn't tell Kiba where we were going or tell Ice what he was, Akeno spoke up. Kiba will figure it out in Ice. We have more pressing matters to attend to, Rias said dismissively. Earth, why are there wings coming from my back? Oh no, now how will I get a harem of magnificent opai? Cried a certain pervert. In the occult research building. Bucko? Akeno? Kaneko? Where'd everyone go? A blonde Bishonen wondered. Underworld. Now I have to warn you about my brother, he can be, well, kind of, was as far Rias got before everyone heard the yell of Rias Tan. Followed by a speeding crimson flash almost eerily similar to Naruto's Hiraishin. Said blur slammed into Rias, who was then lifted off her feet and smothered into the chest of a man who bore striking crimson hair similar to Rias. Rias would have continued to be smothered by her overbearing brother were it not for someone pulling him off her and putting his face into the ground. That is not very fitting of a Satan Seirsex-sama. When Naruto turned to see who had spoken, he saw before him a woman around the age of the now named Seirsex. She stood only a few inches shy of Naruto's impressive height and was garbed in an almost frilly made outfit. Her silver hair was pulled into two braids that fell to her impressive bust, ending with two small ribbons. The rest of her hair that fell to her back was also split into two sections. She wore a small amount of red lipstick that contrasted with her rather pale skin color and drew attention to her silver-colored eyes. What Naruto noticed though was that despite her rather frail look, her muscles and aura spoke of a well of power raging just beneath the surface. It also showed that despite what her looks might say, she was a force to be reckoned with in her own right. If he had to guess, both her and Sayuri would be on about the same power level, though the female devil might win out due to experience. When he saw the two interact, the first thought that came to mind was how similar they were to how Jiraiya and Tsunade were with each other. Hopefully this woman wasn't as terrible a drunk and an even worse gambler. It is good to have you home, Rias, the silver-haired woman said in a straight voice whilst bowing. Okay, seriously, what is up with women here and lack of emotions? Is it something in the water? Naruto pondered, all the while keeping a straight face on the outside. Thank you, Graphia. Everybody, this is Graphia Lucifuge, one of my family's maids. And the idiot on the floor is my older brother Seirsex, Rias said, waving dismissively at the mention of her brother. Naruto quirked an eyebrow when the elder redhead disappeared, only to reappear seconds later crouched, poking at the ground, and a mini raincloud hovering over his head. Rias Tan, why must you be so mean to your Nissan? So the guy's got a sister complex, meh. Not like I can judge. My own birth mother wants to jump my bones, and at that exact moment he felt a pair of eyes undressing him hungrily. He turned to find that it was actually several pairs of eyes doing so. How do I get myself involved with this shit? May I ask who your guests are? Graphia said in the same monotone voice. Dear God, her and Ophis are gonna get along so well, Naruto thought. Oh right, well, if we may save it for my mother and Ather as well? It would be tedious to have to repeat it all. Right this way then, Graphia said as she led the group through the gates to the mansion, all the while dragging Seirsex by the ear. Upon seeing her father and mother, Rias immediately ran and hugged both tightly. It had been a while since she had last actually seen them face to face, and despite her being a big girl, she did still have emotions and so of course had missed her parents. Naruto stared with a small smile on his face at seeing the happy reunion of parent and child. Kushina smiled longingly but had to shake her head as she knew that she may never have that same bond with Naruto. She could still love him, yes, but he would never see her as his mother. Though many would have missed it, a flash of sadness crossed Sayuri's face as she remembered her own mother and father. Fugaku may have been an arrogant ass, but that didn't mean he had been any less of a father to her. Contrary to popular belief, he had not driven her or Itachi to become prodigies and consequently driven Itachi insane. Itachi was really a natural prodigy and she had enjoyed her childhood playing with her cousins and other relatives. Her mother had been a wonderful woman who Sayuri still idolized to this day. It pained her to know that she would never be able to see them again, especially if she went through with becoming a devil. But she also knew that her mother would be mad at her for not taking the opportunity to find love, and Fugaku would be mad that she had missed such an opportunity to grow stronger and experience more life. Mei was also reminiscing about her mother and father. It may have saddened her that they had died at the hands of Yagura's blood purists, but she knew that they had given their lives so she could live hers, and she would never spit on that sacrifice by brooding about their deaths. She knew that her parents would have loved Naruto and his cheery disposition. She sure did. Anko was having similar thoughts to Naruto, as she herself had been an orphan thanks to the Second Shinobi World War taking her parents. They had both been nin sent to the front lines, and she had only been a small child at the time of their death, so she didn't have many memories of them, only pictures to remember them by. Both Kurama and Office watched in silence, neither feeling much of anything. Yes, it was a happy sight, but neither had much of anything to compare it to. Office had been born out of the dimensional gap, and the closest thing Kurama had to a father was the Rikudo, and he had been all but almost dead when he had given birth to her and her siblings. "So who are your friends, Rias?" her father said. "Well, first, guys, these are my parents. Venelena Gremory, my mother, and my father Lord Gremory. What the fuck is his name? I could not find it anywhere." Naruto noted that, like him, once upon a time at least, Rias had inherited her father's hair color but had her mother's facial features and attitude. Odd how that seemed to be the case quite often. The redhead is Kushina Uzumaki, the kitsune is Kurama. Kurama as in the Kyuubi Kurama. A shocked Lord Gremory and Searsex yelled. Even Graphia was shocked as her eyes had widened at the mention of the name. "Mo, you guys took away my chance at an awesome intro." Kurama childishly pouted. Everyone just sweat dropped at one of the most powerful beings to exist being so childish. "Right. Well, like I was saying, the purple-haired one is Anko Mitarashi, the black-haired one with an attitude problem is Sayuri Uchiha." Sayuri glared at the busty red head at that comment, and the woman with auburn hair is Mei Terumi. "And are they all now a part of your peerage?" Venelena questioned. "TCH, as if I'd bowed to anyone, much less her," Sayuri grumbled. Rias chose to ignore the dig at her and said, "No, they're all actually human, except for Kurama." "Then why are they here?" Lord Gremory asked. "Me and Snake bitch over there wanna become devils, and we figured what better place than the underworld. Also, Dobi promised your daughter something," Sayuri said, pointing at the redhead talking to a lowly and blonde-haired beauty. "And who are they, Rias?" Lord Gremory asked with an arched eyebrow. Crimson hair wasn't exactly a common hair color, even among devils, and to see someone with it who wasn't related to him was odd. Naruto chose that time to speak up finally. Bowing, he began, "Nice to meet you, sir. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. As for my friends right here, well, you probably know them. The blonde is Gabriel, and yes, Gabriel as in the famed angel Gabriel. The lowly is Ophis, and again yes, she is Ophis the dragon god." The rest of the Gremory clan was close to having a coronary before Searsex stepped forward, oddly serious. "Explain. Now, to save us both some time, me and my friends here are actually from another dimension. I came here looking for some good fights and to get away from shiver fangirls." Seeing no one was laughing aside from Anko, Naruto sighed and continued. "Well, I eventually met up with your daughter and fought off a fallen. We got to know each other from there. She told me about her problem with the arranged marriage you had set up, and so I told her that I'd help her out." "And why are some of the most powerful beings in your company?" "Kurama is a childhood friend. I met Ophis when I fought Great Red in the dimensional gap, and she's been following me ever since." "You? Fought Great Red? The true dragon god? An even more shocked Sirzek stuttered out. He may be one of the most powerful devils ever, but to go up against Great Red was nothing short of suicide. Yes, and Great Red was soundly defeated, and Uzumaki was holding back as well, Ophis said in her monotone voice. What? Sirzek yelled out, and for good reason. The only other being who stood above Great Red had been the true god. To see someone else come along, a nobody, have Ophis vouch that that person had soundly defeated Red while holding back was insane. Back where I come from, the common profession is shinobi. We are able to use what we call chakra to do things that we would not be able to do otherwise, such as this, and with a snap of his fingers another Naruto poofed into existence right next to the original. This is just the basics of what we can do. One of my strongest attacks allows me to destroy anything and anyone on a cellular level. Mei-chan can use lava and steam quite well, Anko is well versed in using Doden or earth release. Sayuri is a master at controlling lighting and fire attacks, and Kushina can create chains from her chakra that can bind even Kurama. Shocked silence was all that greeted Naruto's speech. From what he had just said, the Gremory clan could only assume that all of them were at least on the level of a high-class devil, with Naruto being even above a super devil. He was damn near a god if he could defeat Great Red. They could only imagine what would happen if any of them were turned into a devil. Wait, so you're here to get Rias out of her engagement? Venelena asked, coming out of her stupor. Naruto just nodded his head in an affirmative. Sirzek and Lord Gremory began to immediately think of the benefits of allowing their fellow redhead to do so. Not only could they almost guarantee Rias' safety, it would also look good on the clan to have such a powerful being associated with them, especially if it was a group package. It also helped that Naruto was the total opposite of Riser. He seemed polite, intelligent, but also good-natured. He gave off this aura of warmth and happiness that was almost infectious. It seemed that Rias had also taken quite the liking to the boy if the way she looked at him was anything to go by. Let's talk, was all Lord Gremory said. We find our red-headed Uzumaki seated in a plush black leather chair. Seated across from him were two fellow redheads, Lord Gremory and Sirzek Lucifer. The three had excused themselves to Lord Gremory's personal study so that they may discuss some business that regarded a particular red-headed busty devil. While Sirzek and Lord Gremory showed their nobility and power through their rigid posture and how they crossed their legs and folded their hands, Naruto's own posture spoke of an unease. He held no doubts that he could take on the two devils, but due to their connection to Rias he wasn't particularly keen on that option. Nonetheless, he retained his own rigid posture, taught to him by Tsunade and her crash course on manners. Both Gremory males gazed at Naruto curiously for several reasons. First and foremost was the reason for their discussion, Naruto's declaration of wanting to free Rias of her marriage contract. His dark crimson locks that were not unlike their own also raised a few questions, being that only members of the Gremory line had that unique shade of red hair. Joining those thoughts were how Naruto felt around them. Both were powerful devils in their own right, Sirzek even earning the title of Super Devil, and yet still neither could feel anything from the teen. If he wasn't sat right before their own eyes, they wouldn't have even known he existed. Likewise, Naruto stared back in curiosity. None of his thoughts were necessarily on the two but more about odd coincidences concerning him and Rias. Both were born into royalty, his own mother being Uzugakure's heiress and his father a Kage. Thanks to their lineage, the both held potential to grow stronger than most ever could, and both of their parents had doomed them to a fate neither had asked for. In the case of Rias, a marriage contract, and in Naruto's case a massive energy construct that had once been a part of a primordial god. It was also odd to see the parallels between themselves and each of their parents. Both had inherited their personality from their mothers, and the looks of their fathers. Both Lord Gremory and Minato held positions of power and were calm and calculative. Kushina and Venelena were calm, when in particular company, but were otherwise almost opposite their spouse in most any other way. Naruto wondered if his parents had lived to raise him like Rias had, would he have turned out similarly to Rias? It was an odd thing to think about. Finally, the staring contest was ended by Lord Gremory shifting in his chair a bit and relaxing his posture. So what can you offer that would have us cancel our contract with the Phoenix clan? Lord Gremory spoke out in his baritone voice. I'm sorry? Naruto questioned, thoroughly confused. Sirzek chose this time to answer. Well, as we see it, Rias is obviously interested in you, and as much as we would like to let her be free of any suitor, that cannot happen if she lacks a fiancé. If she were not already engaged, she would have to deal with countless suitors, and we all know how that could turn out. Added to that is the fact that despite recent progress, a female clan leader isn't exactly seen in the best light. We would need a powerful male to take the Gremory seat. So you, instead of voiding the contract completely, want me to replace it? Naruto questioned. That would be the best option for all involved. It would save all of us a lot of hassle and Rias from being hounded at every minute by unfit suitors, Lord Gremory intoned. Naruto ran his hands through his long locks as he leaned back into the plush leather chair and sighed. Searsex content, and being completely honest, we would rather not have Rias married to that bastard Riser, but the benefits, politically and militarily, offered by his family are a boon to our cause. Now if you could offer us benefits of equal or greater value, then we would be so inclined as to terminate our contract with the Phoenix. Naruto sighed yet again before speaking up. Always hated how you nobles operated and treated family as bartering chips rather than people. Devils, was as far as Naruto got before Lord Gremory vehemently interrupted. We do not. Rias is no bartering chip. The room shook from Lord Gremory's power. Naruto, however, looked nonplussed by the action. While you could argue as much as you want to the contrary, the fact still remains. The only reason that you keep this contract is for the benefits offered. Searsex himself even said that her fiancé Riser is a bastard, and yet still you two would rather sacrifice her free will and happiness by forcing her to marry him or any other male with political power to offer rather than terminate the contract altogether. Searsex and Lord Gremory could only look down in shame as Naruto tore apart their logic. Naruto had never been one for book smarts and politics. However, that didn't mean that he was stupid or naive to how the world of politics worked. It seemed that human or devil politics were the same. Connections and allies won out over personal beliefs and morals more often than not. Naruto drew their attention back on him by speaking, I'm going to say this now, I don't and will never agree with that thought process. If it were up to me, I would rather burn this whole place to the ground than force Rias or anyone into something that they didn't have a say in. Searsex and Lord Gremory tensed as they prepared to fight possibly the most powerful being on the mortal plane before Naruto raised his hand asking them to hear him out. However, Rias wouldn't want that. So here's the deal. I'll talk to Rias and ask her what she wants. If she is okay with replacing the current contract with one with me, then we will talk about benefits. If she doesn't, well, let's just say that that contract won't be the only thing to burn. Naruto said, leaving the threat to hang in the air. Lord Gremory slouched in his chair, holding his head in his hands as the ultimatum Naruto was offering set in. Likewise, Searsex sunk into his own chair, running his hands through his hair. With none of them moving from their position, Lord Gremory called out, all right, all of you can come in. We know you've been there the whole time. At that moment the door burst open, Venelena hurrying into the room, her gown held in her hand so that she could run to her husband's side, the rest of the group trickling in with Graphia bringing up the rear. Naruto then turned to the Gremory heiress, who was the reason for this whole adventure of theirs. So Rias, it's all up to you. Whatever decision you make will be your own. You get to decide your future. Rias fidgeted as everyone's attention shifted to the busty devil. It was a strange thing for her. As nobility, she always had to base her decisions on what was best for the clan, and more often than not that went against what she wanted, but that was not the case this time. She was free to choose what would make her happy. If that meant being engaged to Naruto, then she could choose to do so. If she wanted to wait and choose someone else and be free of marriage contracts altogether, she could do just that. That's when a thought struck her. Naruto had been the catalyst for this whole thing. Her fellow redhead was literally ready to wage a war against hell to make sure that she was free to choose what made her happy, and he hardly even knew her. And that's when she made her decision. With a fire in her eyes that spoke of determination, she spoke out in a voice of similar strength. I want to replace the current contract with Riser with a new with Naruto. No one present was shocked by the decision, but more by the resoluteness with which it was spoken. Her mother smiled as she knew the boy would obviously do anything in his power to make her happy, and as a mother that's all she could ask for. Lord Gremory only bore a small smile, happy that his daughter had finally been able to make a decision for herself. It had always pained him that Rias had to, in a sense, pay the price for his and her brother's fame. Searsex, however, reacted by throwing himself at his sister, wrapping his arms around her waist, and bawling his eyes out, muttering something about being so happy for my Rias-tan. Of course that was cut short thanks to Grafia pulling his ear like one might a child's. That is not the appropriate behavior to have with present company Sears-sama. Naruto finally spoke out, asking a question that had been bugging him since they had met the family. Are you two married or something? The girls from his world were also eager to know the answer, having the same thought process that he was having. Despite how much they fought, everyone who knew them knew that Jiraiya and Tsunade had a very special relationship. The two had never taken the steps to do anything about it, but the signs and motions were still there to show that they truly loved and cared for the other as a lover of sorts. No one knew if they had ever acted upon those feelings, but they had their suspicions. With how similar Sears and Grafia's relationship was, it was understandable that most would think that. Sears chuckled before responding, as far as the general populace goes, yes we are. In fact, the rumor mill has turned our meeting and relationship into something akin to a great romance story on par with Romeo and Juliet. But that's all they are, rumors. Anko was the next to speak up. So if you're not married, then does that mean you're fuck buddies? No one from Konoha was shocked by her blunt question. Even Mei, who had known the snake mistress for a short time, only shook her head at the purple-haired sadist. Sears again chuckled nervously while sweat dropping. No, me and Grafia are more like childhood friends, you could say. And both he and Grafia knew that. At one point in time, yes, they had entertained the idea of becoming a couple and had even dated for a few months, but it had never worked out for them. Their personalities were just far too different and clashed too often for anything more than a close friendship to bloom. Still, they had to maintain appearances due to Grafia's past with the old Satan faction. It was only Sears' name and power that kept Grafia from being punished or worse for her actions during the war. That's when an idea struck Sears. If Naruto could protect Rias and help them deal with the political backlash of them ending their contract with the Phoenix, then he might also be able to help Grafia out as well. He had always felt saddened that he could never give Grafia the life he knew she deserved. Being stuck as the family maid as well as his queen didn't allow one too many freedoms. In many ways her situation was similar to Rias, and if his gut feeling was right about Naruto having a sort of hero complex, then if the crimson-haired teen just so happened to find out Grafia's story, he might be so inclined as to rescue her. Everyone stared worriedly as Sears began to cackle and rub his hands together like some villain from a Saturday morning cartoon. Riget, so how are we going to do this? Naruto asked, ignoring the eccentric Satan. Rias was a little shocked by the nonchalance Naruto had about the whole ordeal. She figured he would protest in some form or another. The sage of course took notice of her curious stare and decided to answer the unasked question. I told you that I would help you out of this situation, and I meant it. Being honest, I find you gorgeous beyond words, and from the few talks we've had I know you're a pretty amazing woman. Of course I would want to get to know you more before we actually marry, but Kami knows we have plenty of time to do that. If saving you from this thing means being with you, well, I can't really complain, he finished with a small smile that showed how honest he was being. The rest of the girls were torn between ing at what he had said and glaring heatedly at the Gremory heiress for stealing his attention from them. Gabriel didn't mind at all though, and was openly gushing at the cuteness of it all. Sayuri on the other hand wasn't as mushy as the others, and so had no problem expressing her displeasure by trying to kill the redhead with her gaze alone. Considering she had the eternal Mangekyo, that was actually a very real possibility. Though she would never actually do it, as that would incur the wrath of Naruto, and that was the last thing she wanted to do for two very different reasons. Naruto had already proved time and again that he far outstripped her in power in every way possible. Besides that, though the thought of Naruto being mad at her did not sit well with her, it never really had. Rias, however, was beyond happy that Naruto actually wanted to marry her, well, in the future, but that still meant he was okay with being her fiancé. She of course knew that the other girls would be vying for his attention and he would probably give it to them, but she was okay with that. From what she had overheard from Kushina and Kurama, he had not had the best life growing up, and it was only in recent years that he had managed to gain some form of happiness. She also knew that Naruto would never forget about her or intentionally make her sad, and would go out of his way to make her happy. That was just who he was. Rias did the only thing she could think to do at that time to properly express her happiness. She jumped onto Naruto's lap before taking his face in her hands and planted a kiss right on his lips. Naruto was a little surprised by the randomness of it but nonetheless reciprocated the gesture with just as much passion. Now the girls were mostly glaring at the red-headed devil. The only ones who weren't were Gabriel, as she was fine with it and knew it would have happened eventually. Kushina was confused about what her own feelings. Part of her was extremely jealous that the younger redhead was closer to her son than she was. At least that was what she was telling herself. The other part of her wished that it was her instead of Rias sitting on Naruto's lap, and that was what confused her. She could not love her son in that way, could she? He had already made it clear that the two would never have a mother-son relationship, and with good reason. Yes, well, we're glad you're happy. We still have to decide how we're going to do this whole switch, Lord Gremory said, interrupting the couple. Indeed. It's not like the Phoenix clan, Riser mainly, will just let this happen without fighting it. The bastard was the one who wanted this marriage more than anyone, Sirzek said. Naruto grinned his foxy grin at the other Gremory clan members. Well then, if it's a fight they want, then a fight is what they're gonna get. Are you sure? I know you're powerful, but the Phoenix clan are known for their insane healing factor. They can regrow whole limbs if need be, Venelena said worriedly. It wouldn't do to have her daughter get her hopes only to have them burned up by the Phoenix flames. Oddly, it was Ophis who began to laugh, which weirded everyone out as no one had ever heard Ophis actually laugh. However, the ones that knew why she was laughing joined her, leaving the Gremory plus peerage members puzzled. Sayuri was the one to catch her breath first and answered their unspoken question. Let's just say that the Dobi is the perfect person to fight against this Riser guy. Again, the Gremory group was left even more confused by this statement. The others only felt slightly bad for this Riser person, kind of, not really. They were going to enjoy watching Naruto curb stomp him, Rias especially. Preview of next chapter. Do you see what you are now up against? You cannot hope to match the power of Riser Phoenix, yelled Riser with a crazed glint to his eyes before he unleashed a veritable hurricane of flames upon the still stationary Naruto. Riser then turned to Rias, expecting to see her crying at the loss of the pathetic man, only to see her smirking. Guess you've finally seen the light of being wed to a devil like me, huh, Rias? Riser spoke, thinking that the Gremory heiress was smirking that he had won the fight. Instead of her rushing to him, shouting words of devotion to him, the busty redhead pointed at the spot Naruto had been. What Riser saw happen next sent fear pumping through his very blood. The fire he had unleashed was still burning brightly but had changed colors. Where the flames had once been a burning orange and white were flames as red as blood. The flames began to twist and contort themselves as if they were dancing to an unheard tune. "Ya know that healing factor you have there is pretty great, but I think I may have you beat, wouldn't you say?" came Naruto's voice from the flames. The blazing element was indeed dancing to a tune, it seemed. A slow melody that sung of Riser's fear and defeat at the hand of the monster that was in the flames. And indeed that's what Naruto seemed to be as he walked out of the flames, his skin and bones literally turning to liquid due to the intense heat of the blaze around him. Even still, lacking the skin and muscles necessary to do so, one could see the grin that Naruto had become known for. The same grin that struck fear into his enemies and brought a sense of warmth and laughter to his precious people. The grin of a kitsune. And as the grin grew, so too did the flames die out. The flames extinguished themselves in a manner to a slave bowing to its master. And as the flames died, everyone bore witness to something no one had ever witnessed, thought they would witness. The black and charred thing that was once skin on Naruto began to change color and spread across his body. The bones that were almost melted began to solidify and reposition themselves with sickening cracks that reverberated throughout the battlefield. Muscles began to reform and pull bone to bone like rubber bands would. At the end of it all, Naruto stood, not a blemish on his body-toned and sculpted body except for a small fist-shaped scar near his heart. But even that looked faded, like it had been there for years. "So Riser Teme, you've seen that I can survive your strongest attack. Let's see if you can survive one of mine, eh?" The cry of Fuuten, Rasen Shuriken, Wind Release, Spiraling Shuriken, rang throughout the area. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.